We start with the breaking news at this hour as Israel has carried out strikes on Iran's nuclear program. The IDF has said with blasts heard in Tehran. The strikes were part of Operation Rising Lion, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, adding Iran was a threat to Israel's very survival. Israel has declared a state of emergency, saying the country expected retaliation. Well, joining me live are our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Beersheba in Jerusalem, our senior reporter, Bern de Boosman at the White House, and our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. Hugo, I'll come to you first. Tell us more about what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying about these strikes.
Yes, Steve. So it is just after 5 o'clock in the morning here. So this campaign by the Israeli military was announced 2 hours ago by the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz. This has been described as a preemptive, precise, combined offensive based on high-quality intelligence. Dozens of targets have been hit across Iran, striking long-range missiles and targets related to the country's nuclear program. So for a very long time, Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat, and we're seeing now a large-scale attack by the Israeli military. Now, there has been a statement by the Israeli military's chief of staff saying that the time had come. We have reached the point of no return. So it is very interesting that the way events unfolded this week. There was a phone call between the Prime Minister and President Trump on Monday. There was a leak of this phone conversation, perhaps not by accident, saying that the President was against any kind of Israeli military action against Iran, while these negotiations for a deal between American and Iranian officials continued. There was a round of talks expected to take place on Sunday, and now these attacks happening. Now, we're seeing reports as well in Israeli media saying that apart from the airstrikes targeting those facilities connected to Iran's nuclear program, there have been assassinations, and the targets include the chief of the Iranian military, senior military officials, and senior nuclear scientists. So a large-scale attack that has been carried out by Israel. A state of emergency has been declared here in Israel. A phone alert was sent to everybody in this country about 2 hours ago. Schools are going to be closed today. Gatherings have been banned. The airport, Ben Gurion Airport, is also closed. So the country, is expecting a retaliation from Iran. The defense minister said people should expect a missile and drone attack in response to the attacks that we're seeing today.
Yeah, we'll ask you about those, the preparedness of Israel in just a moment. But just to come back onto the targets and the focus of Israel's attacks in Iran's nuclear program, was this something that was telegraphed or was known that this was perhaps coming?
Yeah, we saw that in the last few days there had been a number of reports suggesting that Israel was making preparations for a large-scale attack targeting facilities connected to Iran's nuclear program. And for quite some time, Israeli officials had been saying that they saw a window of opportunity to attack because last year, Iran's air defense capabilities were degraded after a number of Israeli airstrikes. Also, Iranian proxies in the region have been significantly weakened after action by Israel, in particular Hezbollah in Lebanon. There had been the concern in Israel that any kind of military action against Iran's nuclear program could spark a reaction from Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militia that is supported by Iran, heavily armed. We know that, Hezbollah has been significantly degraded after more than a year of conflict with Israel. So the Israeli authorities saw that an opportunity here, and what we're seeing today, is that Israeli officials are saying that there was the opportunity here to strike, that Iran was advancing with its nuclear program. Again, for a very long time, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had been saying that he saw the Iranian nuclear program as an existential threat. The Iranians had been saying also for a a very long time that, their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, but now we're seeing this large-scale Israeli attack targeting dozens of locations across Iran, military facilities, military assets connected to Iran's nuclear program.
Hugo, you mentioned that Israel's defense minister confirmed the strikes and declared that state of emergency, also saying that counterattacks were expected in the immediate future. What kind of preparedness is Israel doing to ensure that its people will be safe?
Yeah, it is very interesting also that the Israeli authorities are suggesting that this is just the beginning of what could be, a large-scale offensive over many days. The Israeli authorities were describing it as the first stage of this military offensive against Iran. Now, this is obviously a country with very strict security measures. Israel, there have been, security measures in place for quite some time, especially after October the 7th, the Hamas attacks in southern Israel. So this is a country where the population is, prepared for the possibility of attacks. A number of measures, have been announced, especially this morning. Again, there has been a ban on gatherings. Schools are going to be closed today. Hospitals have also announced a number of measures across the country. The airspace has been closed in Israel. The main international airport has also been closed. So a number of measures have been introduced now by the Israeli authorities as part of this state of emergency that has been declared after these attacks, Israeli attacks targeting a number of facilities across Iran.
Hugo, just to come back to that recent line of a news update that you gave us, Iranian state media, they've been reporting that the Iran Revolutionary Guard's chief, Hossein Salami, has been killed in an Israeli strike. He's among several senior leaders who have died. Tell us a bit more about the significance of Israel with regards to who they're targeting.
Yeah, so it is very interesting that what we're seeing that dozens of targets, military targets, have been hit across the country, but also a number of high-profile assassinations also already have been confirmed by in Iran by state media in the country. So it seems again that these are the indications of a really well-planned, large-scale attack, Israeli attack targeting Iran, nuclear scientists and top military commanders. And we saw again that the authorities in Israel said that those dozens of locations hit included facilities with long-range missiles and targets linked to the country's nuclear program. So again, for quite some time, Israel had been warning, the international community about the threats posed by Iran's nuclear program, Iran's nuclear ambitions. A military official in Israel, speaking right after the confirmation of these attacks came from the defense minister, said that Iran had enough nuclear material to create 15 nuclear bombs within days, and that Iran was advancing secret attempts to assemble those weapons, and that could happen within in a very short period of time. So again, the Israeli authorities saying that Iran had been advancing this nuclear program, dismissing the Iranian position that its nuclear program was for peaceful purposes. And again, remember, there was a deal that had been struck with Iran by the international community during the Obama administration. President Trump, in his first term, pulled out from the deal. Ever since he came back to office earlier this year, he, led these efforts to try to negotiate a new deal with Iran. What we've seen in recent weeks was that, a number of American officials were saying that Iran wasn't making concessions in these negotiations, and that some of Iran's demands in those talks were considered to be unacceptable by the Americans, and that was the position in Israel as well. The authorities were saying that they would go ahead with a military attack, with some kind of military action against Iran if they considered the terms of any kind of deal to be unacceptable for Israel. So during, in the past few days, we saw a number of measures that were announced, in particular by the Trump administration, including the evacuation of the embassy in Iraq, because there is the fear that any kind of retaliation from Iran could also involve American assets becoming targets across the Middle East. So we saw that, in the last few days, there had been indications that an Israeli attack could be imminent, and this is exactly what happened today.
Yeah, we'll be getting reaction from Washington in just a moment. Thanks very much for that. Hugo Beersheba there in Jerusalem. Just to add on to that, Iranian state media report saying that the Iran Revolutionary Guards chief Hossein Salami has been killed. They also added that Faredoon Abbasi, the former head of the Atomic Energy Organization, has also been killed. That's according to Iranian state media. Well, let's cross over now to Bern de Boosman, who's at the White House for more on the U.S. reaction to this. Bern, it's late in the evening where you are. Has the White House said anything?
Well, there's been a brief statement from the State Department and from National Security Advisor Marco Rubio kind of distancing themselves from the attack. But other than that, there had been no real indication of this coming, at least from the White House perspective. At about 11 a.m. this morning, there was another event here at the White House in which Trump was explicitly asked if he thought an Israeli strike on Iran was imminent. He said he didn't think it was imminent, and he explicitly said that he did not want them to do this and potentially scupper any negotiations. Of course, there was indirect and direct negotiations expected to take place on Sunday. He was very explicit in that he did not want anything to get in the way of those negotiations, although he did say he thought things were fairly close to a strike, but certainly not in the time frame that we saw this evening.
And how are we expecting Donald Trump to react to this? As you mentioned, he's said he's didn't want to see Israel attack Iran, but we're not expecting to hear him speak this evening.
We won't be hearing from him on camera, at least this evening, although one suspects he might post on Truth Social at some point during the night. But on one hand, he's been very steadfast in that he wants America to be a close ally of Israel, and he supports Israel's right to defend itself, as he says. On the other hand, there had been reports over the growing months, and it became increasingly clear that there was a rift between Trump and the Netanyahu government into how to approach the issue of Iran's nuclear program. There was reports a few months ago that he had waved off a previous plan for an Israeli strike in Iran, and he and the administration were very explicit in that they wanted to give negotiations more of a chance, which Netanyahu clearly didn't see as the case. But there'd been growing distance between the two sides, and it's just unclear at the moment how he will react if the administration feels it wasn't given notice too much ahead of time. Although we did see, of course, the warnings to U.S. families and U.S. military installations in the Middle East previously this week.
Bern, we understand that the White House is saying that Trump is expected to attend a National Security Council meeting at 11 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning. What kind of posture do you think the U.S. is going to take on this, given that they don't want to say that they're involved, and presumably they have no interest in being drawn into another Middle East conflict?
Well, I think the messaging we'll hear from President Trump and other members of the cabinet tomorrow are again reiterating that there was no U.S. involvement in this airstrike, or in this series of airstrikes which were carried out by Israel unilaterally. And I think we'll hear very strong language from the U.S. warning Iran off of any strike on U.S. military facilities, for example, in Iraq or in the UAE, Kuwait, or Qatar, or Bahrain, where there's obviously earlier this week already been quite some concern about that those facilities could be caught in the crossfire of a conflict between Iran and Israel. I think we'll hear very strong language from the administration tomorrow warning Iran that it does not want to get involved in this conflict, but that if U.S. military facilities in the Middle East are targeted, the U.S. will respond.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Bern de Boosman at the White House. Let's cross over to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, for more. Tom, there were some indications or clues perhaps that something was going to happen, given that the State Department had been recalling staff in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, it was Wednesday that there was a partial evacuation notice, a voluntary evacuation for some non-essential staff at the US Embassy in Baghdad, also at the mission in Erbil in northern Iraq. And then for non-essential staff and family members of military personnel in Bahrain and Kuwait, particularly significant military presence of the Fifth Fleet, the US Fifth Fleet based in Bahrain. Although I have to say it was unclear the degree to which whether this was kind of signalling to the Iranians in a way to try and put pressure on the nuclear talks, which, remember, was supposed to take place for a sixth round of talks between the US and the Iranians in Amman on Sunday. And then we had this morning, I mean, I was in the State Department on Thursday morning. It became clear that something was up, basically. The daily press briefing was pulled off the schedule. I mean, that has never happened, really, during the Trump administration, at least. And I think all the signals were that something may be imminent from the Israelis. And this felt like the Americans trying to position themselves to get ready for that. But I think what is incredibly significant is the statement that we have had from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who has basically said Israel is on its own in this offensive action. The US is not involved. They've said it's unilateral action by the Israelis against Iran. The US, we are not involved in the strikes. And they say our top priority is protecting American forces, and basically going on to warn the Iranians against thinking about targeting any US forces or bases in the region. What's really important about this statement is it doesn't mention the defense of Israel in terms of it being any sort of joint action by the US at all. That is extremely unusual. And I think we're now in sort of uncharted territory, because President Trump had told Benjamin Netanyahu he didn't want him to do this. It's now clear from the Israelis they were basically planning from Monday to do this now. There was a phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump on Monday. It was described as extremely tense. It was clear that President Trump had tried to stop the Israelis from attacking the Iranians and give the diplomatic path more time, and that hasn't happened. So it feels like Prime Minister Netanyahu has gone it alone, potentially against the direct wishes of the President of the United States. That is extremely significant. And now, remember last year when there was a build-up and an escalation, direct escalation and firing between the Israelis and the Iranians on at least two occasions. The Americans basically organized a defensive coalition to help Israel defend itself against the missile strikes from the Iranians. There doesn't feel like any kind of that sense of organization this time around. You know, Israelis were woken up by air raid sirens, and they've said this was to wake people up, not because of incoming Iranian missiles, but that I think is almost inevitable now, an Iranian counterattack. And so you're going to have to see the US probably try and scramble to help the Israelis without that sort of sense of organization last time. But beyond that, even that isn't abundantly clear. And remember, there's been an extremely fractious relationship between Mr. Netanyahu and President Trump. Mr. Netanyahu has in the past made a point of trying to show to Washington that he is prepared to act unilaterally in the way that he thinks is in Israel's self-interest. Remember, he tried to derail the first nuclear deal under President Obama by basically going behind President Obama's back, making direct appeals to Republicans in Washington. The White House was enraged by his behavior that time around. So you've got a very fractious relationship between these two men at an absolutely critical moment now, with the chance of a far, far greater escalation in the Middle East now very possible and potentially likely. And we're seeing very wide-scale attacks, at least 6 locations across Iran. A nuclear enrichment facility, so says Benjamin Netanyahu, at Natanz has been attacked. Civilian casualties. Iranian state media talking about civilians, including women and children, they say, killed in one strike in Iran. It's clear that assassinations are involved of nuclear officials. So this is a big attack, very widespread, amid a sort of fractious relationship between Israel and its absolutely key ally, the United States, when it comes to its defensive posture in the Middle East.
Israel's military says Iran has fired around 100 drones towards its territory after Israel launched a major attack on Iran overnight. Let's just run through some of the pictures we have here. These are showing Israeli Air Force jets taking off before the attack. Israel says it's targeting the country's nuclear program. And this is the moment a blast hit the capital, Tehran. Iranian media say residential areas have been hit there and across other cities too. Well, Iranian state media says the head of the armed forces, Mohammad Bagheri, and the top commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, Hossein Salami, were killed in the Israeli strikes. 2 senior nuclear scientists were also killed, the former head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization and the president of the Islamic Azad University in Tehran. It follows days of speculation that Israel was planning to launch military action despite US efforts to negotiate a nuclear deal with Tehran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the operation could last several days.
We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program. Last year, Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles at Israel. Each of these missiles carries a ton of explosives and threatens the lives of hundreds of people. Soon, those missiles could carry a nuclear payload, threatening the lives not of hundreds, but of millions. Iran is gearing up to produce 10,000 of those ballistic missiles within 3 years. Now just imagine 10,000 tons of TNT landing on a country the size of New Jersey. This is an intolerable threat. It too must be stopped.
Right, let's get a sense of some of the geography here. In the early hours of the morning, Israel announced it launched a major military operation against Iran's nuclear program and senior military commanders. The Israeli military targeted dozens of sites in the country. Iranian state media says parts of Tehran have been hit, and the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, confirmed Iran's main nuclear enrichment site at Natanz was also hit in the Israeli strikes. Well, Tehran now appears to have responded. Israel says Iran launched around 100 drones at its territory. Warning sirens have been heard in major cities like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I speak now to Shashank Joshi, who's defence editor at The Economist. Thanks for coming on the programme.
Good morning.
We'll get into some of the details very quickly, but just firstly, your headline thoughts about what's happened overnight.
Well, first of all, this is perhaps something of a surprise because it preempts US-Iran nuclear talks that were due for this weekend. So clearly, Israel preferring the element of surprise rather than waiting for those talks to conclude. Secondly, the Americans very, very clearly stating that they were not involved and trying to stay out of this, although they may well be dragged into the aerial defense of Israel from any retaliation. And I think the third point is, this is critical, this is very early days. We are probably only seeing the first waves of what will be a multi-day Israeli campaign. So, for instance, I note with interest Israel has not yet attacked Iran's most deeply buried nuclear site, which is in a place called Fordow, but I would be surprised if that remains the case in the coming hours and days.
So you mentioned there that the timing took many by surprise. What about the reasoning behind striking like this now?
The Israeli public claim is that Iran was accelerating work towards a nuclear bomb. In my opinion, whilst Iran has conducted some weapons-related activity since 2003, when it shut down its formal weapons program, I don't believe that is the real trigger for this attack. I believe the real trigger is that Israel sees a historic opportunity to act politically at a period where US-Iran talks were looking relatively unsuccessful, in which Iran was looking exceptionally weak, in which its principal ally in the region, Hezbollah in Lebanon, had been decimated by Israel last year, and in which Iran's nuclear program, particularly its stockpile of enriched uranium was expanding dramatically. And all of those factors together, I think, made Israel decide this was the time to take the great risk of attacking those nuclear sites, but also clearly, much more widely than just nuclear sites, also Iran's military leadership.
And just give us an assessment of the words overnight from Benjamin Netanyahu describing, of course, the repeated line that we know about the country facing an existential threat from Iran. What about your assessment of the state of the nuclear program in Iran right now?
Well, Iran has had a nuclear weapons program since the 1980s. And in the 1990s, it authorized a decision to build a number of nuclear bombs and to test them. But in 2003, American intelligence judges that they halted that program, possibly because America was, of course, at that time invading countries on both sides of Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that program was halted. And in fact, as recently as March, the director of national intelligence in America, Tulsi Gabbard, said that American intelligence judged it was still halted, that Iran had not made a decision to build a bomb. But that doesn't mean that Iran was not dabbling in elements needed for a nuclear bomb, if we can introduce that nuance. It was, for example, looking at things like computer modeling of how a nuclear implosion might work. It was looking at plastic explosives for use in a nuclear device. And so for the Israelis, that was viewed to be an unacceptable progress towards a bomb. I think in general, Iran has not moved significantly closer to a bomb in the last few months. It's accumulated more uranium. But the key change took place in 2018 when Donald Trump pulled out of a nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And at that point onwards, Iran's enrichment capacity and its stockpile of uranium has grown. And that was the real shift after 2018, I would say.
Shashank Joshi, thank you very much for your analysis. That's Shashank Joshi, defence editor at The Economist. Thank you. Let's speak now to our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Beersheba, who's in Jerusalem. Hugo, just talk us through what we know and what we don't know right now about what happened overnight.
Yeah, Louis, so we know that the Israelis carried out a large-scale attack on a number of facilities in Iran related to the country's nuclear program. So we're talking about military facilities, nuclear sites, also air defense systems, and crucially, also senior military leaders and also scientists. So I think, the strategy here is very similar to the Israeli strategy in Lebanon against Hezbollah last year, not only to attack and destroy infrastructure, but also to attack the leadership, to destroy, the chain of command. So we're still getting reports about the identities of those who have been killed. State media in Iran has confirmed that at least 2 senior military officers have been killed, have been assassinated as a result of these attacks. Now, the Israeli military said more than 200 planes were used in this operation. More than 300 bombs were dropped at 100 sites. So we've seen, that a number of locations across Iran, at least 6 cities were hit as a result of those attacks that happened in several waves during the morning, including the capital, Tehran. We're still trying to understand the scale of the damage, of the destruction on the ground in Iran. State media is also saying that a residential area of Tehran was hit. It is reporting that civilians were killed as well. But I think the details and the statements coming from the Israeli authorities suggest that, in their view, this has been a very successful operation to really damage and destroy the capabilities, the ability of of these facilities being used by Iran in its nuclear program. I think we're also getting indications from the Israeli authorities that this could be just the beginning of a prolonged offensive. So these attacks are likely to continue in the next few days and even weeks.
And Hugo, what about people there? Because you mentioned the timescale there, expected to continue. What does that mean for people living in Israel?
Yeah, so there is a state of emergency that's been declared in Israel, and the authorities have been warning the population that they are expecting a large response from Iran in terms of drones and missiles being fired. Earlier this morning, the military said more than 100 drones had been fired by the Iranian military, and that reports now in the last few minutes suggest that all drones had been intercepted by the Israeli army. I think, the concern here is that this could be just the beginning of this Iranian response that could involve not only drones but also missiles, an attempt to try to overwhelm the country's air defense systems. Remember, this is a country that has a very sophisticated system of protection. But again, what the authorities are telling the population is that, they should expect a large response from Iran following these attacks. Now, gatherings have been banned in Israel. Schools are closed. The main airport has also cancelled all its flights as the authorities are, making preparations for this possible Iranian response.
Let's get the latest now from the BBC security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
This is a massive gamble by Israel. Their argument is that they had no choice, that according to Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, that Iran was accelerating its work towards building a nuclear bomb, and that this was their best and only chance to try and prevent that and the region spiraling into a nuclear arms race. The counter-argument, which has run for some time and I think is still pertinent today, is that enough of the Iranian regime will survive this to now definitely accelerate towards getting a nuclear weapon. We don't yet know how much has been destroyed because Iran's nuclear facilities are buried deep underground. They've been very secretive. They have evaded some of the inspections, allegedly. And it would take enormous bunker-busting bombs, deep penetration ordnance to get right underground to destroy all of those. Ordnance that Israel, frankly, doesn't have. So although they've dealt a severe blow to Iran's regime and to its nuclear military program, which is militarized, there's no guarantee that this is going to be the silver bullet that Israel is hoping for. And there is a fear now that not only is Iran going to continue its retaliation, and who knows where that's going to end, is it just going to be against Israel, or are they going to extend it to Gulf Arab countries? Jordan, for example, which is not a Gulf country, but it's been shooting down Iranian drones that are coming towards Israel. Where will this end? But most importantly, the hawks within Iran's establishment are now going to be saying, we told you so, we were right, they were going to attack us. The best deterrent to stop further attacks like this from Israel is go for the bomb. And what happens if Iran gets the bomb? Saudi Arabia will want one as well, and then Turkey, and then Egypt, and so on.
Frank, what is the role of the US here and the relationship between Israel, the US, and Iran?
So Donald Trump sees himself as a friend of Israel, but he has been so far a relatively restraining hand when it comes to Iran. He's not managed to restrain them at all on Gaza. In fact, he seems to have given Netanyahu a free hand to do what he likes in that territory. But when it comes to Iran, he has been saying to Israel, look, hold off, because I've sent Steve Witkoff and his negotiators to Muscat and Rome to try and reach a deal. We all know that Trump loves a deal, and he's been trying to reach a grand bargain with Iran, whereby Iran will open up itself to more inspections and curb its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions being lifted. And those negotiations seem to have gone absolutely nowhere. So Israel has clearly lost patience with it and told US President Trump in advance, we're going to do this. And they kind of not exactly needed a green light, but they needed to make sure that they weren't going to be prevented by the US. The US says they didn't take part in it, but they didn't stop it. So there's a kind of slightly equivocal role here. The main priority for the US right now is trying to deter Iran and warn Iran not to attack US bases in the region. If you remember, they put out a warning some days ago for non-essential staff to leave, to be evacuated from US embassies in places like Baghdad and Kuwait.
Okay,
They
Frank,
will be very worried
Frank,
about
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We will be back with you in just a moment. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News. This is our continuous coverage of those strikes overnight. Israel striking nuclear facilities in Iran, a response from Iran, drones being sent in the other direction. The latest report from Israeli media that those drones have been intercepted. With me is Frank Gardner, our security correspondent. Frank, we were just talking about the relationship between the US, Iran and Israel there. If I could just get you to throw forward a little now. What are the various options facing Israel, Iran in the hours and days ahead here?
Well, first of all, what everybody's going to be hoping for is that this calms down, that this doesn't kind of metastasize into a far bigger conflict that drags in the US. Donald Trump doesn't like wars. He likes to say, we end them. He's a business guy at heart. And that's why he was pushing for a deal. Now, we haven't heard yet whether the proposed sixth round of US-Iranian talks that were due to take place in Muscat on Sunday, whether those are cancelled. It seems hard to imagine they would go ahead. But what some will be hoping for in Washington and possibly in Israel is that this strike, this Operation Rising Lion, as Israel calls it, will have so weakened and chastised the Iranian regime that somehow it puts its hands up and says, okay, all right, we'll do a deal, we'll curb our nuclear program. I think the opposite is likely to happen. The hardliners, the hawks in Iran's security establishment, and it is they who run the country. I mean, the supreme leader is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, but around him he's got a kind of securitat of people linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the guardians of Iran's original Islamic revolution from 1979. And the hawks in that establishment will be saying, this proves once and for all we need to now go for a nuclear bomb. That is the risk here. I think there will be some in the Israeli establishment who will be hoping that if they continue these strikes, that somehow the Iranian regime is going to implode. They would like nothing better than to see a change of regime, an end to what Israel sees as the existential threat to its existence. Because let's just imagine if Iran does get a nuclear weapon and it's able to weaponize, a nuclear device, and it's able to weaponize it, put it into warhead, and able to mount it on a ballistic missile. Imagine if that was aimed at Tel Aviv. Israel's a tiny country with a heavy concentration of population in urban centers like Tel Aviv and Haifa. That does pose an existential threat to Israel, which is why they've decided to do this. But others are saying this is exaggerated, and Israel has been banging this drum for a long time, and the best way out of this is diplomacy. Annoyingly, frustratingly for everybody in the region, was that we had a deal. We had the 2015 nuclear deal, the Vienna deal, the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This was the crowning glory of President Obama's foreign policy, was a deal whereby Iran would submit to really quite intrusive inspections by the UN nuclear watchdog, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, and in return, sanctions would be lifted. And then when Donald Trump took office the first time, in 2018, he pulled the US out of that deal. Iran didn't react for a year, but after a year, they said, you know what? If you're not going to play, then we're not going to. And they started exceeding the limits, in other words, breaking the terms of that deal. And they started heavily enriching uranium, well beyond the level that you need for civil nuclear power, which is 20%. They've been enriching it to 60%. And they've got a lot of highly enriched uranium, which it wouldn't take much to bring it up to the level at which you need to make a bomb. Now, it's one thing to make fissile material, it's another to weaponize it and put it into a warhead and mount it on a ballistic missile. But Iran does have a lot of ballistic missiles, some of which have been hit in this attack, but it's got plenty more. And that is the fear here, that this will push Iran into accelerating its drive towards acquiring a nuclear bomb.
Hello and welcome to Verified Live on a day totally dominated by Israel's strikes on Iran. The magnitude of these attacks are on a completely different scale to what we saw last year. Israel says they targeted Iran's nuclear program, claiming it was their very survival that was at stake. Tehran, though, has described it as an act of war. Explosions were heard in the capital, Tehran, and at the Natanz nuclear facility, around 200 miles to the south. Several Iranian nuclear scientists and military commanders have been killed. Iran's state TV is reporting that civilians, including children, are among the dead. Well, the scale of the damage to the nuclear facilities like this in Natanz is not yet clearly known. Much of the Iranian program is carried out deep underground. Well, Israel says its military action is continuing. Its secret service, Mossad, has taken the rare step of releasing this footage, which it claims was filmed inside Iran, showing its operatives preparing to launch an attack. Well, Iran has already retaliated, sending a wave of drones towards Israel. Israeli forces say all of them were intercepted. In the next 60 minutes, we'll bring you the latest reaction.
You're gambling with World War III.
Это нарушает нашу безопасность, расширение НАТО.
As a military strategic planner, a former planner, you don't want politicians telegraphing what your next moves are going to be.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too.
A peacekeeping force does not exist with a ceasefire.
Israel is continuing its airstrikes on Iranian military targets following its barrage of rockets overnight. Several of Iran's military leaders and 6 of the nation's top nuclear scientists were killed, with state television reporting that civilians, including children, are among the dead. Well, the operation, called Rising Lion, targeted Iran's nuclear sites and also the capital, Tehran, killing, among others, the leader of Iran's most elite military unit, the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Iranian state media say that 78 people, including children, were killed in Tehran alone. The figure has not been independently verified, and of course we'll bring more on that as and when we get it. Now, in a video statement, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that his country has launched Operation Rising Lion to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. Well, we can cross over to speak to the Security Brief's Mikey Kay, former senior officer, assault helicopter pilot in the British military, joining us live from France. Of course, this is happening. It's happened so quickly, we didn't even get time to get you into the studio, Mikey, so it's good to see you remotely. Just when it comes to what was targeted by the IDF, by Israel inside Iran, talk us through it.
Yeah, hi, Kasia. It's a hybrid target set, if you like, not an unsurprising one in terms of the IDF's objective to ameliorate or attrit or degrade Iran's nuclear aspirations. Let's take a look at this slide, please. Let's go slide on the target map. Not an unsurprising target set there, if you like. You've got some military bases out to the left or to the west of Iran on the Iraqi border. You've got Tehran in yellow at the center top there, and around the center of the screen, you've got Natanz. Let's just have a quick look at those. I think let's start off with Tehran. This is interesting for me. It's a target set that involved high value targets, HVTs, we call them in the military, leadership inside the Iranian Guard Corps. You alluded to it earlier, but it was the chief of the IRGC, which is Iran's most prominent military capability. Let's go slide. Let's take a look at this individual. This is Hussein Salami. He is the IRGC Guard's chief, killed in an airstrike. So he's literally, a massively important person when it comes to military planning inside Iran. Additionally to him, the chief of the Iranian Air Forces, if you like, regarded as the architect of the Iranian Shahed drone program. He was also targeted and assassinated. And what's really important about the Shahed drone program, Kasia, is it's basically the drone program that's come to prominence with Iran selling it to Putin and Russia, and the Shahed has been used extensively to attack Ukrainian cities. So that individual has also gone, and then other individuals that were targeted, high-value targets regarded by the IDF, were nuclear scientists in and around the Tehran region. Now, if we look in terms of infrastructure, if we can just go back to slide, please, on the map, we'll look at Natanz, which is pretty much center of Iran. It's the red dot there. That is effectively the epicenter of Iran's main enrichment facility. Now, this was struck, and we now have what's called a BDA assessment, bomb damage assessment, which is a satellite image which shows where Natanz was struck. Let's go slide on that, please. 4 areas you can see basically across the facility. Reports from the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, indicate that the nuclear facility was severely damaged in the strike, although the actual specifics and details of where we can see those areas of destruction, they need to be interrogated a little bit more to work out what those areas do inside the facility. Let's obviously go, let's go back slide again to the map, please. On the left-hand side of the map now, up towards the Iraqi border, Tabriz, Pirin Shah and Kermanshah, they're target sets that are associated with Iranian military capability, likely ballistic missile facilities and radar sites, which the IDF also targeted, Kasha, in October last year after Iran launched a massive ballistic missile and drone attack, over 180 projectiles in October. So I think the culmination of all of this information is that, Kasha, given that Iran relies on engines from North Korea for its ballistic missile program, it relies on sodium percolate from China. Sodium percolate is the chemical that's used for the solid fuel propellant that goes or propels the ballistic missiles. This will hurt Iran in a big way, and it's not going to be able to redevelop and re-energize that ballistic missile program anytime soon, although it won't be through lack of trying.
Indeed. And so that, Mikey, was the damage done. When it comes to the IDF and its attack, just talk us through how this attack was launched.
Yeah, and Kasia, I don't think this operation should be underestimated. Indications suggest over 200 Israeli Defense Force aircraft in 5 waves of strikes, including, and we've spoken about this on the security brief before, the F-35 fighter, which has stealth capability. Let's take a look at the F-35. We've talked about it before in the security brief. The IDF has just under 40 of these. They're about 100 mil a unit a pop for an aircraft. But what's important about these for this particular operation is it's got what's called a low RCS, Kasha, a radar cross-section. So it basically allows the F-35 to get closer to the target with a reduced radar cross-section in order to improve the success of the target, especially if that target is a surface-to-air missile system, for example. Other lightly aircraft within these packages, these 5 waves, are the F-15 and the F-16. All of these aircraft, incidentally, are supplied by the US to Israel. And the F-15 and F-16, they can carry a cruise missile capability. What that gives them, Cash, is the ability to deep strike from far away, again, reducing the risk on the pilots and the aircraft and increasing the probability of success on those strikes. And they'll be going after Iran's surface-to-air missile systems, a layered surface-to-air missile system, not too indifferent to the Iron Dome, but not as capable. So differing aircraft into capability waves from what's called SEAD, suppression of enemy air defense, which gets rid of all the surface-to-air missiles, and then in come the other jets with the cruise missile capability or offensive strike capability to be able to clear the way. So that's effectively the way that it was conducted.
Mikey, as we talk, I'm just keeping an eye on Israel's televised briefing. They're saying that, an official there saying that these strikes were due to incoming Iran attacks. So just a line there, and we'll keep an eye on it. But when it comes to Iran itself, they also have some form of layered protection system to protect themselves from airstrikes from Israel.
Yeah, they do. It's tiered, it's layered, it's tiered, a little bit like Iron Dome. It's nowhere near as capable as Iron Dome. Let's take a look at the major component of that. It's let's go slide. This is the S-300 anti-aircraft missile system. There'll be no surprise to hear that that is designed and developed and supplied by Russia. That goes out to about 200 kilometers. And then you have a middle system called Tactical Hunter. That's out to about 120 kilometers that the Iranians use. And then the innermost system is the Korad 15, and that's out to about 75 kilometers. So they do have a tiered layered defense. And again, that's what those F-35s and the suppression of enemy air defense, their main objective would have been to try and target and identify and take those out.
And Mikey, just talk us through the route that the IDF jets take.
Yeah, I was looking at Flight 24, and this is quite fascinating. Let's go slide and look at a little bit of the geography of the area. On this slide, on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see Israel. In between Israel and Iran, which is in the white on the center and right of the screen, you've got Syria, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. What would make most sense to me, Kasia, in terms of the path of least resistance and the most direct route would be across Iraqi airspace and into Iran. I think what's really interesting is if we can go to a slide of the flight radar map and the software. This is it here. Hopefully this will, is it? Brilliant. Okay, hopefully this will move in a moment. But if it doesn't, what you can see here is basically Iraqi airspace. You've got Baghdad in the center of the screen there, and then Iranian airspace was completely shut down and cleared rapidly after the operation started. So to me, the fact that Iraqi airspace was shut down and cleared means that would be a viable option for the IDF to use in terms of striking Iran. And just so the viewers know, the aircraft that you can see, we just go back to that slide, please, backslide. These basically are civilian air traffic. They're airliners, all have what's called a transponder, which has a 4-digit code that civilian air traffic is required to basically put up. It will be given to them by air traffic, and secondary surveillance radar will see each one of those. So basically, this software can see every single aircraft that's airborne, and you can see right in the middle of that screen there that Iran and Iraq were cleared. And obviously, that's a good thing, Kasia, when it comes to deconfliction and the reduction of risk on civilian air traffic when you've got military activity in the area.
Yeah, it's staggering when you look at it like that it's completely cleared. Now, just this week, the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran had failed to comply with its non-proliferation obligations for the first time in 2 decades. Mikey, could that be what prompted this strike, or has it been in the planning for quite some time?
Kasia, I think the answer to that is a combination of both. So, we've seen the negotiations going on between the US and Iran, and contingency planning, or com planning as we call it in the military, that will be required because behind every soft power negotiation, you need a hard power big stick. And that's what effectively the US would have been planning for. It's what Netanyahu administration would have been planning for a long time. What would they be planning? What would they be looking at? Let's just take a look at a slide and look at Iran's nuclear facilities. As you can see, they're quite extensive and they're quite spread over Iran. But an operation like this, looking at those sites in Iran, is a massive amount of detailed planning. We can see the Natanz, which was targeted on this airstrike. But interesting, above that in green, you got Fordow. That's a secondary enrichment site that is more fortified, that has more surface-to-air missile systems around it, making it hard to penetrate. You've then, to the left of that in yellow, you've got Iraq. That's basically it's a water facility used to cool reactors, but also as a byproduct of that cooling, you get plutonium, and that can be weaponized as well. And then just interestingly, down into the bottom left of Iran, you can see that red dot, Beersheba. That is Iran's only nuclear power plant that is currently in use. And that uses not enriched uranium from Iran, but it uses enriched uranium from Russia. So all these areas will have been scrutinized heavily by IDF military intelligence, by planners. Also, the readiness states of capability, they will have also been prescribed. So if a trigger mechanism was initiated, the plan was set.
So, and just when it comes to Israel, they say that they have never officially claimed to have nuclear weapons, although it's understood that they do. Iran has been building its program for decades. Mikey, how far off are they, and what actually constitutes a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, let's just unpack that a little bit. Let's start with Israel. There is very little transparency on Israel's nuclear capability. It does not confirm and it does not deny the existence of a nuclear arsenal, but it is widely believed that Israel does possess a nuclear capability for sure. What it looks like in numbers, that's uncertain. In terms of delivery systems, the IDF does have the capability. Very, very quickly, what constitutes a nuclear weapon? Enriched uranium up to 90%, a warhead, and a delivery system such as a ballistic missile or an aircraft. Combine those three, and then you have an issue.
Iran has tonight launched retaliatory strikes on Israel. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says it attacked dozens of targets, including military centres and air bases. Smoke has been seen rising over the skyscrapers of Tel Aviv after an aerial attack on the Israeli city. Explosions have also been heard in Jerusalem. Tonight's bombardment is in retaliation for Israel's strikes on Iran last night, which targeted military and nuclear sites. Israel said the attacks were vital to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. The country's spiritual leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, promised his country would inflict heavy blows in response. Well, this was the scene in Tel Aviv in Israel just an hour or two ago. There have been huge explosions in the sky over central Israel, although it is unclear what's from missile strikes and what is Israel intercepting them with its Iron Dome. Tonight, Israel says it struck a nuclear facility in Isfahan, and that is in addition to last night's strikes on the country's biggest nuclear facility at Natanz and also at Kermanshah. Well, our first report tonight is from Lucy Williamson, who's in Tel Aviv.
In bunkers and stairwells, they listened. To Tel Aviv, under fire from Iran. Defences scrambling above a city of civilians and military bases. From ballistic missiles, arriving minutes after launch. Impacts felt inside shaking buildings. For the third time tonight, missiles are being fired at Israel, fired at Tel Aviv. This is the response Israel was expecting. And all across the country, people are listening to the sound of Israel and Iran at war. Missile defense systems were also activated over Jerusalem. Israeli media reported several impacts across the country, including near military sites. A direct hit to this building reportedly left people trapped inside. Israel began striking Iran overnight. The nuclear enrichment site at Natanz, one of the first to be hit. A target for Israel's prime minister for decades, hit in what he said was a last chance to stop Iran making a nuclear bomb. Air defences, missile sites, nuclear scientists and military leaders, including the head of Iran's armed forces, wiped out in a series of nationwide strikes. An attack involving 200 fighter planes working with covert intelligence teams at a secret base inside Iran. These pictures from Israel's spy agency are said to show commandos firing at a missile launcher during this morning's attack. Their prime minister said the clock on Iran's nuclear ambitions had run out.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction.
In Iran, hundreds of protesters called for revenge. Iran's supreme leader said Israel had made an enormous miscalculation and that the consequences would bring it to ruin.
They should not imagine that they struck and it's over. No. They started this. They launched a war. We will not allow them to escape unscathed from the major crime they have committed.
Iran has also now reported unconfirmed signs of radiation at the Natanz nuclear site.
I call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint to avoid further escalation. I reiterate that any military action that jeopardizes the safety and security of nuclear facilities risks grave consequences for the people of Iran, the region, and beyond.
A former general in Israel's Air Force said there were limits to what military force could achieve.
I think we can say pretty much easily this was the most complicated and actually complicated, probably dangerous operation that Israel ever did in its history. We have a huge military success, a huge one. Okay, what's the next step? Are we going to transform it to something that will say, okay, the region is safe for the next 50 years, not having any nuclear threats from Iran?
Tonight, Israel was still striking across the country. This explosion filmed in West Tehran. Others reported at nuclear facilities in Isfahan and Fordow. Israel says Iran was secretly building a nuclear bomb. Too big a risk, it said. But Iran may now decide that negotiations won't protect it from attack, and that a nuclear weapon will. Well, the alerts have been lifted for now in Tel Aviv, but Israel's attack isn't over. There's a drone just flying above us here, and the threat, of course, hasn't gone as well. Israel's Prime Minister tonight had a message directly for the Iranian people, saying Israel's fight was not with them, it was with their government. The time has come, he said, to stand up for your freedom from the evil and oppressive regime. And that strengthened the view that some people here have, that Benjamin Netanyahu's goal is not just to dismantle Iran's nuclear program, but its regime as a whole.
Thanks so much, Lucy Williamson, there in Tel Aviv. Let's assess the situation in Jerusalem as well. Our correspondent Ione Wells is there. What's the latest where you are, Ione?
Saw a series of drones fly over Jerusalem, followed by some big explosions and bangs. Now, it's not clear if those were the sounds of strikes or interceptions by Israel's defense system. Israel has said that the majority of drones and missiles that were fired by Iran were either intercepted or fell short. Now, minutes before that, we had all received this emergency alert. Sirens were going off here in the same way that they did at 3 a.m. this morning, urging people to go to shelter or remain very close to them. This was after Iran confirmed that it was launching retaliatory military strikes on central Israel after a series of Israeli strikes on Iran today. Now, for now, that emergency alert has subsided. People are being urged to remain cautious, but as the last 24 hours have evidenced, that could change again very quickly.
Ione, thank you, Ione Wells. Well, this isn't the first conflict between Israel and Iran, but it is the most explosive. The risks are huge. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, is here. Frank.
Well, Jane, this conflict is bigger, more extensive, and potentially more dangerous than anything that's gone before. The targets hit range right across Iran. It's the biggest assault on that country since the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s. One of the principal targets was Natanz, around 200 miles south of Tehran. Tonight, the UN's nuclear watchdog says it's been destroyed. It was Iran's chief uranium enrichment facility. That's a process that can have both peaceful and military purposes. Tonight, Israel said it also hit a nuclear site in Isfahan. And in the western city of Kermanshah, new footage of Israeli airstrikes. Missile bases have been struck across the country. On top of this, key military figures have been assassinated. Major General Hossein Salameh, the head of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, Major General Mohammad Bagheri, head of Iran's armed forces, and Brigadier General Amir Hajizadeh, the head of the Revolutionary Guards Air Force. Also targeted, at least 6 nuclear scientists. So how is this being viewed by the Iranian public?
The mood in the country is really divided. Some people, they're supporters of the Iranian establishment. They are angry, they're furious, they want revenge. However, there are some other Iranians, those who've been repressed in the past 4 decades by the Iranian regime. They are quite happy that the top Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders are killed.
Now, back in 2015, Iran was enriching uranium to just 3.6%, enough for civil nuclear power. Today, it's 60%, closer to what's needed for a bomb. But it was Donald Trump, close ally of Israel, who pulled the US out of a hard-won deal to curb Iran's enrichment. Today, he's ordered more US naval forces to the Middle East, amid fears that Iran could hit US bases. And there's another risk, that Israel's operation could even backfire.
The military strikes from Israel are likely to expedite the thinking inside Iran about the fact that a nuclear bomb is the only real insurance that the Iranian leadership has against a major Israeli or US-led attack that targets the core of the leadership.
So look, in purely tactical terms, Israel, which, don't forget, is a nuclear power, has achieved military success. It struck deep into Iran and assassinated top commanders. But this isn't the end. If Iran's regime survives, it may well now race to build a bomb, setting off a nuclear arms race across the Middle East. Jane.
Thank you, Frank Gardner. Well, Israel's attacks come as the US and Iran are trying to reach a deal on Tehran's nuclear program. Talks are meant to resume this weekend. President Trump has urged Iran to make a deal, warning of even more brutal Israeli attacks if it doesn't. Tonight, the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer spoke with President Trump. The men say they agreed on the importance of diplomacy and dialogue to resolve this mounting conflict between Iran and Israel. Tom Bateman reports.
A superpower at sea to defend its ally. Tonight, the US confirmed it helped Israel shoot down Iranian missiles. This sharp escalation after President Trump had been erring on the side of diplomacy. As Israel attacked overnight, Washington warned Iran not to hit back at American bases, saying it wasn't involved. But by this morning, Mr. Trump was on the offensive, saying Tehran's hardliners had lost the fight to get their terms on the nuclear deal. They're all dead now, he said, and it will only get worse. There has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter, with the next already planned attacks being even more brutal, come to an end.
In accordance with Rule 39,
tonight, the UN Security Council has been meeting in emergency session to discuss the crisis. Amid the calls for de-escalation, the Americans warned about further consequences.
No government, proxy, or independent actor should target American citizens, American bases, or other American infrastructure in the region. The consequences for Iran would be dire.
We strongly and unequivocally condemn the barbaric and criminal attack. A series of targeted assassinations were against senior military officials, nuclear scientists, and innocent civilians.
The Israeli leader has long pushed Mr. Trump for a green light to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. Timing was critical after Israel destroyed many Iranian air defenses last year and wiped out much of the deterrent effect of Hezbollah on its own border. Mr. Netanyahu argued now was the time to strike. But Mr. Trump, via his envoy Steve Witkoff, turned instead to rounds of talks with the Iranians, meaning this close but often fractious relationship was under even more strain. Mr. Trump told the Israelis publicly and privately he wanted more time for talks, leading to a tense 40-minute phone call on Monday.
There's a chance of massive conflict. We have a lot of American people in this area, and I said, we got to tell them to get out.
Mr. Trump said he was losing confidence in the talks, but as late as yesterday was still equivocating over an Israeli strike.
I'd much prefer an agreement. As long as I think there is an agreement, I don't want them going in, because I think that would blow it. Might help it, actually, but it also could blow it.
It comes in a region on edge. Some American embassies and bases are already partly evacuated. At home, Mr. Trump has been preparing for his big military parade. His hope now is that his allies' deadly pressure pushes Iran towards a nuclear deal on his terms. His opponents are already accusing him of enabling a reckless gamble, risking America getting dragged into a war with Iran. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Washington.
Well, in a moment, we'll get the thoughts of Lise Doucette, who is here with me. First, though, let's head to Washington and join Gary O'Donoghue. And that's one of the key questions where you are, Gary. Can the US avoid being dragged into this?
Well, the administration's position has clearly evolved over the last 20 hours. We started with the Secretary of State describing it as a unilateral action. Now today, Donald Trump talking about it being an excellent piece of action involving great American hardware. And indeed, we're now learning that Americans are involved in helping intercept these missiles coming in. It comes with domestic risks for the president. Yes, there's strong support for Israel, but there also is strong animosity to any further involvement in Middle East wars and the 40,000 US troops that are in the region. Now, Donald Trump, you know, he's always talked about promises made, promises kept, and politics is about the deliverables. Now, if you look at Ukraine, if you look at the hostages in Gaza, if you look at getting Iran to do a deal, I think this president is finding the process of delivering harder than he thought it would be.
Thanks, Gary. Gary O'Donoghue. And Lise Doucette is our chief international correspondent, of course. And people watching, Lise, will want to know what will happen. Where will this go now? But it is so unpredictable.
So unpredictable and so perilous. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel is making it clear he's waited a long time for this moment and he's not going to waste it. We have seen in the war across the region over nearly 2 years now that the guardrails are off. So now Mr. Netanyahu is saying he wants to destroy Iran's weapons-making capability. What does that mean? How far will it go? All we know on day one is that it's going to take days with all of the dangers of escalation, both deliberate and accidental. But there are Iranian hardliners who also have been waiting to have a go at Israel. They believe they were held back last year, told to exercise restraint, and now they literally are calling the shots. So, day one, Israeli and Iranian civilians are being hurt and killed. There's growing fears about the danger of contamination and leakage. And finally, Prime Minister Netanyahu has also been making clear, as we heard in this program, he wants Iranians to use this moment to rise up. Many do want to see the back of the regime, but many don't. And that too could be explosive.
Hello, I'm Nikki Schiller. Welcome to the programme. We start with our breaking news. Iran and Israel have been launching new strikes on each other as direct military conflict between the two countries goes into a second day. Now, I'll take you to the latest pictures in a moment, but we want to start with the key developments this hour. Iran has targeted ballistic missiles at Israel as its supreme leader vows to inflict heavy blows. It's now being reported that at least 3 people in Israel have been killed. The Israeli Defense Forces says it is continuing to strike targets in Iran. The IDF says they are aimed at removing threats. Previously, nuclear sites and military leaders were targeted. The UN says 78 people have been killed. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has accused Israel of starting a war. Israel's UN envoy Danny Danon has called Israel's operation an act of national preservation. President Trump has called on Iran to strike a deal with Israel over its nuclear development, but talks scheduled for Sunday seem unlikely to go ahead. In the last hour or so, Jordan has said that it has reopened airspace it had suspended flights due to the strikes. Well, let me take you to the live pictures from Tel Aviv. Our team in Israel say that when the sirens sounded just before dawn, millions of people across the country sought shelter. The authorities in Israel don't allow us to share the exact location of missile strikes for fear it will provide useful information to the Iranian military. But I want to take you to some pictures from central Israel. Now, this is where there was a direct hit by an Iranian missile on a residential building, and in the last few minutes the Israeli emergency services have confirmed that 2 people died when that residential area was hit by a rocket. We're told it was a woman in her 60s who was rescued unconscious and without vital signs, and also a man around the age of 45 who the Israeli Emergency Service, the MDA, say was pronounced dead after being evacuated. You can see that there is still an operation going on around that area where that Iranian rocket hit that residential building. We understand around 20 people were also injured in this particular incident. Israeli media reporting that across the country 3 people have been killed. And I want to show you some of the pictures that we've been getting in. You will see the moment that that missile hits. Now, the Israeli military says it has been intercepting missiles throughout the night. You can hear in the background the air raid sirens have been sounding as people went to their shelters. Now, in Iran itself, explosions have been heard just outside Tehran, and several blasts were heard at the city's Mossad airport. Now, Iran's raids are a response to Israel's attack on Iranian nuclear and military targets early on Friday. Iran says 78 people were killed and 320 injured in Israel's initial attacks. Well, the Iranian leader Ayatollah Khamenei says Israel has launched a war and will suffer heavy blows in return. Last night, there was an emergency session at the United Nations Security Council. And despite Washington's efforts to distance the US from any involvement in Israel's strikes, Iran's ambassador to the UN accused the US of complicity. Here is some of what he had to say at that session a few hours ago.
The United States' complicity in this terrorist attack is beyond doubt. The officials of the United States have expressly and brazenly confessed their willful aid and assistance in the crimes and gross violation that Israeli regime committed as of last night, including the deliberate transfer of arms. We will not forget that our people lost their lives as a result of the Israeli attacks with American weapons. These actions amount to declaration of war.
Well, Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, also accuses Iran of intending to destroy Israel.
We know our enemies. We know their ideology. And when a regime builds ballistic missiles, enriches uranium to near weapons grade, and openly declares its intent to destroy us, we believe them. We take them at their word. And we take action before it is too late.
And there was this stark warning from the US representative at the Security Council meeting.
No government, proxy, or independent actor should target American citizens, American bases, or other American infrastructure in the region. The consequences for Iran would be dire.
Good evening from Tel Aviv. Israel has sent dozens of surface-to-surface missiles at targets in Iran's west, as the two arch-enemies traded heavy blows for a third day. The assault came as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Iran would pay a heavy price for civilian deaths and even speculated that the Iranian regime may fall. Well, Iran says more than 100 people have been killed since the start of the fighting. Israel's attacks are focused on oil depots and facilities that are linked to Iran's nuclear program in Tehran. Satellite pictures show a huge fire burning at the Shahran oil refinery. In Israel, at least 10 people have been killed and many more have been injured. A missile has hit Haifa tonight, and a number of other cities also came under attack. Well, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has sent RAF fighter jets to Cyprus today, and earlier the Foreign Office advised against all travel to Israel. With the latest on the fighting, here's our Middle East correspondent, Lucy Williamson.
This is a war Israel's leaders have long prepared for. Its citizens are catching up fast. Again tonight, rescue teams were out after direct hits from Iranian missiles in Haifa and Kiryat Gam. The price of failure for Israel's air defences already written on neighbourhoods like Bat Yam. A direct hit to this apartment block. The blast so destructive that 20 buildings around it are due to be pulled down. Rescue teams digging for residents trapped in the rubble pulled a 7th victim from the debris tonight. They're still digging for people missing from this apartment block. Injured residents climbing over the rubble lining the streets outside. This is a different kind of attack to the ones Israel is used to. Its Prime Minister wanted to attack Iran while it was weak, but it's still strong enough to inflict real damage.
Like just a huge boom, and after that a lot of dust in the air. Like I was able to see next to me only half a meter next.
There was smoke everywhere, Katia said. I couldn't breathe. The door just flew off its hinges. My mother is 76. She was injured in the head and had stitches in both arms. I'm trying not to cry. 3 days into this war, many Israelis think it's still worth the price. In an interview on American television, Israel's Prime Minister was asked if regime change was part of the plan.
Could certainly be the result because the Iran regime is very weak. I think it's basically left with two things. It's plans to have atomic bombs and ballistic missiles. That's basically what Iran has. They certainly don't have the people. 80% of the people will throw these theological thugs out.
In Iran today, fresh panic as Israel carried out more strikes in Tehran. Among the targets hit, the Justice Ministry. Iranian media say more than 100 people have already been killed there since Friday. We didn't want this war, Iran's foreign minister said. We were focused on diplomacy over our nuclear program, but this was forced on us and we'll defend ourselves. Last night, Israel said it attacked 80 targets in Iran, including this oil refinery north of Tehran. It says it still has many more targets in mind. US President Donald Trump wants this war to end in a nuclear deal with Iran. Mr. Netanyahu's end goals are less clear. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
Well, the Iranian government is activating emergency shelters with mosques, metro stations and schools being prepared to protect civilians. The Iranian government limits access to the country for journalists, but the BBC's Persian service provides news to Iranian audiences in Farsi. Our colleague Siavash Mehdi Adalan from the BBC Persian service has been looking at how people in Iran have been responding to these unprecedented attacks.
Unprepared for the sudden outbreak of violence, this woman tries to avoid the devastating impact of an Israeli attack in Iran's capital. Social media allows Iranians to record their experiences and their trauma. Authorities are asking people not to film the attacks or the aftermath. Many are doing the opposite. From moments of impact while caught in traffic, to cheers for the anti-aircraft personnel. Mashallah. Mashallah. Iran's air defense, no match for Israel's Iron Dome, still manages to intercept drones that come without warning.
I haven't slept for 2 nights now. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. All this reminds me of my childhood when we were in war with Iraq. Back then, at least we had sirens and advance warnings, but now, nothing.
Tonight I wish to speak to you, the proud people of Iran.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called on Iranians to rise up and topple the clerical regime. And there is not a shortage of opposition figures in waiting, including Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince from the 1979 revolution, closely aligned with Israel's administration, who sees an opportunity.
The root cause of the problem has been the regime and its nature. And the only solution ultimately that will benefit both the Iranian people as well as the free world is for this regime to no longer be there. I've been arguing this point from the very beginning, that the ultimate solution is regime change. Now we have an opportunity.
Yet many Iranians critical of the regime do not see Israel as an ally.
I'm not a supporter of the Iranian government, not at all. Really, I'm not. But in this situation, I feel a sense of unity among the people. We definitely won't back down against Israel.
Whether friend or foe, Israel has woken Iranians up to the harsh reality of war. But the future of the clerical establishment has never been so uncertain. For the Iranian people, things will get more difficult before and if they get easier. Siavash Ardalan, BBC News.
Well, this is a fast-moving story developing all the time. Let's speak to my colleague Lucy Williamson about what is happening tonight. Lucy, what can you tell us? What's the latest?
Well, every night here there have been several sirens, several warnings of missiles. The missiles keep coming and some of them do get through. But Israel has now occupied Iranian airspace for almost 3 days, taking out a lot of its air defenses and targeting a long list of nuclear sites, military sites, ministries, energy facilities. Today it said it had killed the head of the intelligence for the Revolutionary Guards, Mohammad Kazemi. Here in Israel, the head of the armed forces said Israel would increase the intensity of its operation, and that raises several questions, among them whether the US will come and help Israel to target some of Iran's hard-to-reach nuclear sites, whether the UK and others may help to come and defend Israel from Iran, and also whether Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has an exit plan for this war.
Lucy, thank you. Well, as we heard earlier, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, said today that RAF fighter jets will be sent here to the Middle East to protect British interests in the region. But what are they and where are they? Joe Inwood explains.
Now, it may not technically be in the Middle East, but RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus is the UK's most strategically important base in the region, and it's being reinforced. Now, the numbers haven't been made public, but they will include Eurofighter Typhoons and Voyager refuelling aircraft.
Royal Air Force Akrotiri is a critical forward deployable base to the UK. It's about 330 kilometres from Akrotiri through to Tel Aviv, so flight time not long at all. It allows the UK to project power and influence within the region.
But it's not the only UK presence in the Middle East. As well as the RAF base in Akrotiri, there are also 2 army battalions at another base in Cyprus. The UK also has a naval base in Bahrain with 4 mine clearance vessels and a Type 23 frigate. Also, the HMS Prince of Wales carrier group has just passed through the region and is still nearby. Also, there are special forces, although their locations are a secret. Now, the Prime Minister insisted the reinforcements in Akrotiri were for contingency support, but the government's refused to say whether it might, as it did last year, help protect Israel from incoming Iranian attacks. Now, Iran has said that if they do that, UK bases could well be a target, and they would be vulnerable.
For the UK, there would be a considerable risk for its facilities that were within range of Iranian weapons. As I mentioned, the UK doesn't really have much in the way of ballistic missile defence itself.
But for now, the message coming from the UK government is for de-escalation. They say that these reinforcements are to protect existing assets that could well be vulnerable in an increasingly unstable region.
Well, tonight, President Trump has called on the two sides to reach an agreement and even suggested that a peace deal may be within sight. It's also emerged tonight that he rejected a recent Israeli plan to try and kill Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That has come from 3 senior US officials who've been speaking to our US partner, CBS News. Donald Trump at the moment is on his way to Canada to take part in the meeting of G7 nations that's happening, and our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is there. Sarah, what do we know about this assassination plan?
Well, it is being reported that when this was put to Donald Trump, the idea of trying to kill the Ayatollah, he flatly vetoed it. And senior administration official has described the thinking this way, saying, have the Iranians killed a single American yet? No. Well, until they do, we are not even talking about going after the political leadership. So that was very clear. I mean, America is involved in this conflict to an extent because they're helping to defend Israel. They have been shooting down missiles that have been aimed at Israel. But today, Donald Trump has been at pains to stress that America is definitely not involved in the attacks on Iran. Now, there are people in Tehran who frankly do not believe that. And he had one very clear message, though, about trying to involve the United States, saying if we are attacked in any way, shape or form, the full might of the US armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before. So he is very eager to warn off Iran from trying to involve America in this conflict. And of course, when all the G7 leaders come here in Canada, that's what they're going to want to talk about, de-escalating this conflict, making sure it doesn't spread more widely through the region. And Donald Trump does seem to be remarkably optimistic about the idea of getting a peace deal done. He says it won't be difficult, it would be fairly easy to resolve this conflict. And he even seems confident that talks can go on that were happening between America and Iran about trying to stop Iran ever developing a nuclear weapon. They were called off today when Iran pulled out. But Donald Trump's view is that what's happening now, the conflict, actually might make a deal come quicker, he says.
Sarah, thank you. Well, it is at this time of night, it's after midnight now here in Israel, that people both here and in Iran start to brace themselves. They've seen heavy attacks for the last 3 nights. There's no reason to believe that tonight is going to be any different, particularly when you hear that international diplomacy doesn't seem to be having any impact.
And we start this hour with the hostilities between Israel and Iran, which have now entered a 4th day. Here are some of the latest developments from the last few hours. Israel's Defence Minister, Israel Katz, has warned that the residents of Tehran will, as he puts it, pay the price for Iranian attacks on his country's citizens. He says Iran has been deliberately targeting civilian areas. Israel says the number of people killed by Iranian missiles has risen to 24 since Friday, with 8 of those deaths coming overnight from Sunday into Monday. Iran's health ministry says that more than 220 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since Friday. The Israeli military says it hit a command centre of Iran's elite Quds force in Tehran. And the Houthi militia in Yemen, a close ally of Iran, has launched more missile strikes against targets in Israel, triggering air raid sirens in several areas. Well, Israel says there have been missile attacks against Jerusalem and Haifa overnight, and also in Tel Aviv. Our BBC team there filmed these pictures. Well, let's take a look at the areas which Iran has targeted with missiles. These were the attacks in Haifa. This is to the north of Israel, and the location of a major port and oil refinery. These pictures were in the skies over Jerusalem. Israel says its air defense systems intercepted various threats and people were told to take cover. Meanwhile, Israel says it struck military sites in central Iran. Iranian media say a military complex near the capital had been hit. Now, with BBC journalists not able to work inside Iran, less footage of Israel's attacks has emerged. But late on Sunday, Iran confirmed the head of the Revolutionary Guard's intelligence unit, Mohammad Kazemi, had been killed. Well, let's speak to the Director General of the Middle East Association and former UK Ambassador to Iran, Nicholas Hopton. Ms. Hopton, thank you so much for joining us on BBC News. Yes, it's an area you know well. How concerned are you at how quickly events could escalate from where we are now?
Good morning. I think we're at a very pivotal moment in a very dangerous situation. Since Israel first launched their rather unexpected, in terms of timing, the strikes Thursday night, things have moved very quickly. I think if Prime Minister Netanyahu had gambled on having a swift capitulation by the Iranians, that's clearly not happening. And I think the situation is ramping up in terms of tension. You've seen overtly killed many civilians on both sides. And I think today leaders comes at a very important moment, not least so that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, can set out his views and hear from his colleagues, because the position of the United States in this conflict will be very important to how it ends and moves forward in the coming days.
Yeah, Mr. Hopton, we are having a fair bit of breakup on your line. I'm just going to persevere a little bit longer because I do want to hear, if possible, what you've got to say. So hopefully that line will settle. You mentioned President Trump there. Just perhaps explain how crucial his role could be in terms of the relationship between Israel and Iran and his influence in both areas.
I think Prime Minister Netanyahu will be seeking to draw the United States into the conflict. And obviously, what Donald Trump decides to do will be decisive. The President of the United States has made clear many times that he does not like the United States being involved in foreign wars. And at this stage, the United States has limited its role to helping to defend Israel from Iranian attacks, air attacks. Now, if the US were to take a more front foot approach and to be directly involved in targeting Iran, Iran has also said that will hold the United States responsible, and to a degree already do. That would lead to a rapid ramping up of hostilities, and I'm sure more bloodshed on all sides.
Also, an interesting prospect is Vladimir Putin or Russia acting as a mediator between the two countries. What's the relationship like between Russia and Iran, and could that help having their involvement?
Well, Vladimir Putin, of course, is an unlikely peacemaker given his hostility and offensive against Ukrainian sovereignty. But in this instance, he may have a role to play, given that he does seem to have a relationship of sorts with Donald Trump, the US president. And is the relationship with Iran is close. I would say it's tactical more than anything, but the Russians and the Iranians do support each other mutually in the face of their global isolation. I think whether Vladimir Putin would be able to engage with the Israelis at this stage is a different question.
OK, Nicholas Hopton, we will leave it there. Nicholas Hopton, their former UK ambassador to Iran. And once again, apologies for the breakup on the line there at times. I think it was worth persevering and getting your perspective. Thank you. Well, let's go now to the Middle East and talk to our correspondent, Hugo Beersheba, who's in Petah Tikva, north of Tel Aviv in Israel. Hello to you, Hugo. Just take us through exactly where you are and the damage that you are able to see.
Yeah, it was a long night of attacks. Again, the third consecutive night of these Iranian missile attacks, responding to this Israeli campaign that started on Friday. And we heard loud explosions across the country with air defense systems trying to intercept those missiles that had been fired by Iran. Not all of them were intercepted, and one of them hit this building here. And as you can see, there is a lot of destruction. You can see this massive hole here. This is the point of impact of the missile. And this is a 20-story building, residential area. There's a lot of damage as well to the nearby buildings. A lot of work here underway to clean up the rubble. There is, a lot of damage here, destruction to the cars that were parked here because of falling debris. So we've been talking to people, here, and also after a long weekend of attacks, and there is, a different feeling now because people felt they were protected. There is obviously a very sophisticated air defense system here in Israel. But what the authorities have been saying is that Iran has been using different kinds of missiles with large explosive payloads in those missiles. So this is the damage that those missiles have been causing. So they've been urging the public to stay alert. There's a state of emergency here, to seek shelter when the air raid alerts sound, because this is what the authorities have been saying, that they expect these kinds of attacks to continue as this Israeli offensive against Iran continues as well. We don't know what the target was. The Israeli authorities have been accusing Iran of deliberately targeting residential areas. We don't know whether there was a different target here. This is a residential area, and as you can see, all these buildings now have been evacuated. So we're talking about hundreds, possibly thousands of people who have now been displaced because of the attack that happened here at around 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and Hugo, just in the last few minutes, those updated casualty figures of 24 people killed in Israel since Friday. And it's interesting hearing you talking about Israeli people, because as you say, there is a very sophisticated anti-missile system in Israel. So missiles getting through, do you get a sense of surprise from people that actually these missiles are being able to break those defense systems?
I think there is an element of shock. I think a lot of people are surprised, perhaps, with what is being happening here in the last few days, even though the authorities have been saying that this is very sophisticated, but it isn't perfect. So again, they've been warning the public to stay alert. There's a state of emergency here in place, and they have been indicating that this campaign against Iran, that they say is against the country's nuclear and military facilities, is going to be a prolonged offensive. So we're possibly talking about weeks, not days. And they say that attacks like these are likely to continue. The Iranian authorities are about to respond to these attacks. They have described these Israeli attacks as aggression, and that they have the right to defend themselves. So again, the message from the Israeli authorities to the population here is to remain alert, seek shelter. There is a very strong system in place, but it isn't perfect.
Okay, Hugo Bashega at Petah Tikva, just north of Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Iranian state TV has been hit by an Israeli strike in the last few hours. Dramatic pictures. It caused the channel to go off air altogether. And in the last half hour, Iran has condemned that attack as a war crime. It came shortly after Israel issued an evacuation order for a large part of the Iranian capital, Tehran, saying it had plans to strike military infrastructure that would endanger the life of civilians in the area. It is the fourth day now of missile strikes between the two countries, which started early on Friday when Israel launched a series of surprise attacks targeting nuclear sites and killing Iran's most senior military commanders. Now, Iran restricts access to the country for journalists, but BBC Verify has been using satellite imagery to confirm those attacks on both nuclear and military sites. So here are some of the locations where strikes have been carried out just in the last few days. This is a missile base in Big Haneh. Compared with an older image, this satellite image taken yesterday clearly shows damage to the roof. And Isfahan is one of Iran's key nuclear sites. It was confirmed over the weekend that 4 critical buildings at this site were damaged, including the uranium conversion facility. On this satellite image, you can now see visible damage to the buildings there. Well, the BBC is not allowed to broadcast from inside Iran, but our colleagues at BBC Persian have been keeping across the situation. Parham Gobadi has this report.
Iranian state TV came under attack during its live coverage. Iran's capital has been under heavy bombardment in recent days. This is Tehran only a few hours ago. Many residents have tried to flee, especially after Israel asked people to evacuate areas near military facilities. But for many, escaping has proven impossible due to paralyzing traffic. One man inside Iran told us why he stayed behind.
I gave up because of the heavy traffic. On the other hand, our entire building has been evacuated and someone needs to stay behind to look after the neighbors' belongings. Besides, smaller towns don't have the capacity to accommodate such a large population.
But it's not just Tehran. Strikes are hitting almost every corner of Iran. This is a hospital in the western city of Kermanshah. Iran says Israel was behind the strike. A human rights group and local sources say a missile launcher was deployed nearby, and it may have been the real target. Either way, this is the reality of war. Civilians paying the highest price. The historic city of Isfahan was struck multiple times yesterday. And in the religious city of Mashhad, the Israeli military says it hit refueling aircraft at the airport, some 2,300 kilometers from its borders. Longest range Israeli strike since the beginning of the conflict. Authorities in Iran say it's not only the fighter jets. Israel also has boots on the grounds.
The most significant blows by the enemy are carried out by local spies.
Iranian police say they've raided a drone workshop in southern Tehran. They say Israeli agents assemble drones inside the country and then load them onto pickup trucks to launch them from there. Iranians say there are no sirens and no shelters. Many feel they're trapped in a war they never chose after decades of repression. Parham Gobadi, BBC News.
Well, here in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country is on the way to achieving victory, claiming that it has full aerial control over Tehran. Overnight, Iranian missiles penetrated Israel's air defences, killing 8 people in attacks in Tel Aviv, Haifa and other cities. Our Middle East correspondent Lucy Williamson has the latest from Tel Aviv.
Israel started this war to make Israelis safer, it said, seeing Iran's ballistic missiles as a separate existential threat. Last night, several slipped again through Israel's defences. One landing right in the heart of Tel Aviv. The speed of Israel's offensive in Iran is fueled by the knowledge that this is what happens when a single missile lands. The bar Victoria opened here 25 years ago was a few meters from the impact site. Still in shock, she told me Israel needed to keep up its attacks. We need to finish this so it's final, she said, and not postpone it again for another few years. Are you scared? I asked her. Yes, very. At an airbase today, Israel's Prime Minister praised their achievements. The military said it had destroyed a third of Iran's missile launchers.
The Israeli Air Force is in control of the skies of Tehran. This is a change in the entire campaign. We are on the way to achieving both of our goals, the prevention of nuclear threat and the missile threat.
But how much damage can Israel do to Iran's nuclear program? Some of it buried deep underground in secret sites.
We cannot delay it by more than 2 or 3 weeks. And to the best of my judgment, even the Americans cannot delay it for more than few months. And that's a sensitive issue. It means that if there is a determined, a serious intention to block Iran from turning into military nuclear power, the only way is to announce a full-scale war on the regime itself and carry it on until they are toppled down.
Many Israelis remain firmly behind this war as casualties here begin to mount. Israel's army is now pushing hard on Iran's capital city without any sign of a clear end or exit plan. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
We start in the Middle East with a number of major developments to bring you in Israel, Iran and also in Gaza. So let's begin with something which could be a key indicator of how the US is viewing the conflict between Israel and Iran. We can see President Trump here arriving in Washington just after 5 in the morning. He cut short his trip to the G7 summit in Canada. His spokesperson had told us that he wasn't leaving early due to the fighting in the Middle East, but he was pushed by reporters on Air Force One. And then it was clear that the situation was still very high on his agenda. He told reporters he was in no mood to negotiate with Iran.
I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're not looking. We're looking for better than a ceasefire. Right now, we're doing pretty well. Remember, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. Not to go too deep into it, they just can't have a nuclear weapon.
What was the thinking on the call for Tehran to evacuate? Is there a threat or is there incoming? What was the thinking on the full evacuation?
I want people to be safe. And that's always possible. A thing like that could happen. I just want people to be safe.
Is there any new concern about U.S. troops or assets in the region at all today?
Great people, they know how to protect themselves.
And when you say better, what's
we'll come down so hard if they do anything to our people. We'll come down so hard, then the gloves are off so beautifully. No, I think they know not to touch our troops.
Sound not great on Air Force One, but the words that everyone is really looking into at the moment is when he said we are looking at something better than a ceasefire. Not clear what that meant, but lots of speculation, and we'll be delving into that throughout the programme. The rest of the world, of course, watching these events very, very closely. China accusing Mr. Trump of pouring oil on the conflict and urging its citizens to leave Iran and Israel as soon as possible. And the European Union's Foreign Affairs representative Kaja Kallas had this to say about potential US intervention.
When it comes to United States getting involved, then it will definitely drag the region into a broader conflict, and this is in nobody's interest. And from my call with Secretary of State Rubio, he emphasized that it's also not in their interest to be drawn into this conflict.
Israel has been conducting its 5th day of attacks on Iran, which is also launching its own missile and drone strikes. There have been more casualties on both sides. The Israeli military has issued more evacuation orders for parts of Tehran. This footage was filmed there earlier today. You can see everyone trying to leave the city, filling up their cars with fuel. Many of the drivers are saying it's really hard to get fuel and the roads are chock full of cars and really stressful trying to get out of the city. Israel says it's hit a number of missile and drone launch sites in the west of Iran. Iran says it's carried out successful missile attacks on Israeli military intelligence headquarters and offices housing Mossad, although there's no evidence of this. Missiles also fired at Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Well, this was Tel Aviv early this morning, apparently as an Iranian airstrike was taking place. It appears that the overnight attacks from Iran have been less intense than in recent days, with no reports of any deaths, though. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency has said it's identified additional elements that indicate a direct impact on underground enrichment halls at the Natanz nuclear site in Iran. The underground enrichment plant was one of several targeted by Israeli strikes on Friday. Now, the global nuclear watchdog says this latest assessment is based on continued analysis of high-resolution satellite imagery. It added that there were no changes to reports from the Fordow and Isfahan enrichment plants in other parts of the country. Well, let's take you to Israel now. We can join our correspondent Ione Wells, who is in Hezbollah, which is in the north of Israel. What's happened there, Ione?
Well, here in Herzliya, which is just north of Tel Aviv, it's a coastal, normally touristy city. You can see behind me that a bus depot was hit by an Iranian missile this morning. There's multiple buses behind me that have suffered pretty extensive damage. This one has been completely gutted by flames. Now, we can estimate from where this is what the target of this Iranian missile was, but Israeli censorship rules mean we cannot broadcast that. In the meantime, though, we can say that nobody here was hurt, nobody was injured. It doesn't seem that there were people in the area. I've spoken to people in the wider Herzliya region who say that they reported hearing loud booms. They saw plumes of smoke when this happened. And just here, you can see the site where this missile appeared to have hit. It's about 5 meters deep. This clearly made a significant impact. People reported, as I say, hearing very loud explosions in Herzliya when this went off and seeing smoke even across the other side of the city. So this is one of the main direct hits that has been reported as part of those retaliatory Iranian strikes today. In the meantime, we know that there are more strikes that have been reported in Tehran.
Ione, what have people been telling you that you've managed to speak to about how they feel about their sense of safety and whether the Iron Dome can protect them at the moment?
Well, there are mixed feelings about this. I think certainly there is a feeling of shock about how many in the last couple of days have got through. Now, still, of course, the overwhelming majority have been intercepted. But some Israelis that I've spoken to have said that they're not used to seeing things get through. And it has felt like this conflict has been a lot closer to home, particularly in areas that I visited like Bat Yam, like Tamra, like here in Herzliya, which have suffered from direct hits. In terms of the response, though, to the Israeli government, and what people think they should be doing in response to some of these direct hits, it does vary. Some I've spoken to remain supportive of the Israeli government and say that they feel even though some of their communities are suffering as a result, the government should continue striking Iran because they see a sort of bigger picture aim of what they describe as kind of striking Iran's nuclear program. However, I've also spoken to some Israelis who say that this isn't representative of all Israelis and they would like the government to stop. Some that I spoke to, for example, yesterday cited that they fear this will damage negotiations to release hostages from Gaza. Others said that they felt this had taken attention off Gaza and they weren't happy with what the Israeli government and the IDF were doing both there but also in Iran at the moment. So there are some mixed views among Israelis about how the government is responding to this, but certainly I think something that everyone shares is a sense of shock that this is hitting communities, buildings, some residential areas even, bringing this much closer to home for them.
Ione, as we speak to you, we are also getting live pictures from just south of Tel Aviv, which we're going to share with our viewers as well. This is the site of another strike at Rishon LeZion, and the Foreign Affairs Minister of Israel, Gideon Saar, is there just talking to people and looking at the damage that has been done there in Rishon LeZion. What is the official word coming up from the government at the moment about how long this could take and what it is they want now from the Americans?
Well, that is a question that many are asking. What is the sort of long-term strategy? What's the end game here for Israel? And at the moment, we don't necessarily know. The rhetoric coming out of Israeli ministers has certainly been clear that they want to carry on until they feel they have completely sort of eliminated Iran's nuclear program. They've also, though, hinted that they are increasingly targeting, of course, top military targets, including personnel, but also infrastructure, but also targets associated with the regime, whether that be media, whether that be people close to the leadership in Iran. So that is something which we know we are increasingly hearing from members of the government about what this endgame might look like. But it is unclear, as you say, what the endgame will be. At what point would they consider their sort of offensive on Iran at the moment a success? And, as you say, what involvement would they want from the US at the moment, particularly from President Donald Trump?
Ione, good to see you. Thank you so much. We can take you now to Gia Gol, one of our colleagues from BBC Persian, who is in Jerusalem for us. Gia, just update us on what is happening in terms of damage to infrastructure, people killed in Iran today.
Well, Lucy, as we talk right now, I am receiving messages from Tehran. They say they can see a plume of smoke in center of Tehran, in west, and also during the day the Israeli fighter jets had been pounding numbers of places in Tehran and in Karaj, another city not far from Tehran, very strategic city in terms of industrial area and military compounds. But it seems Israeli also last night have killed one of the top General Shadmani, who was the commander of Khatam al-Anbiya. This is a branch and arm of Iranian Revolutionary Guards, very powerful in terms of military, economy, and also in politics as well, well linked with Iranian supreme leader. He was killed, and his killing posing this question. Of course, Israelis say they have killed him, but Iranians have not confirmed this yet. But what we are hearing right now in Iran, the government has been asking the personal protection units of the officials do not carry device which connect to the net. They are afraid there might be electronic surveillance, or at least we know that killing a general with a high position just 5 days ago, his predecessor was killed. Certainly Iranians are worried the Israeli agent may have infiltrated or spying on them. That's why they knew exactly where he was, and they may have taken him out.
And Gia, the fear that this is causing amongst Iranians at the moment, particularly with President Trump also sort of saying people in Tehran have to evacuate. What sort of stories are you hearing from people there as they try to leave Tehran with their families? You know, there's often no fuel as well. What sort of stories are you hearing?
Lucy, the population of Tehran is, if you count the surrounding area, weighs more than the population of entire Israel. And just imagine the entire country has to leave their homes. And even if they want to leave their homes, it takes time with their cars and get out of the city. I am hearing from people, they say we have sick people at home. We don't have a shelter. And obviously Iranian government haven't thought about this day. They haven't built shelter. And so many people are worried if this kind of attack happened, they might be hit. Many people have a loved one in the prison. They think if the prisons are being hit, those people have nowhere to go. And we hear this kind of story over and over again, and many people are angry with the government. They say this is not their fight. This is the government war they impose on the country, and so many people are angry with the economic situation, with inflation. That's why I think the Israeli government think by attacking Iranian security forces, by attacking Revolutionary Guards, intelligence service, which they have a pivotal role in suppressing and oppressing the protests in the past, they might create an environment for Iranian people to rise up. And I think this kind of problem, for example, the banking system was disrupted, it was hacked. Some of the gas station pumps didn't work, electronic one, there was a problem. And I think these kind of psychological war could agitate people, and I think Israeli hope people rise up and topple the government without sending any troops underground.
Gio, really good to get your thoughts. We're just going to leave you for a moment to listen in to Gideon Saar, who is Israel's foreign minister, speaking at the site of a strike in Rishon LeZion. He's taking questions from the media, speaking in English now. Let's have a listen.
Is it regime change, as many are suggesting now?
We have very clear goals. First of all, to severely damage the nuclear program. We hadn't finished with that. We still have objectives. We still have targets that now we can target easily, because our Air Force now can relatively fly freely there, and we still have objectives. Secondly, to severely damage the ballistic missiles program of the Iranian regime. And thirdly, to severely damage the plan to eliminate the state of Israel. Regime change is not an objective of this war. It can be a result, but it's not an objective we put to ourselves in this war.
The Iranian regime has done terrible things, but many would say that Israel is the real international pariah, accused of genocide in the International Court of Justice. Your Prime Minister wanted on war crimes allegations by the International Criminal Court.
These ridiculous allegations were already thrown by the appeal after we appealed, because this ridiculous court and corrupted court never even discussed the issue of jurisdiction, for example, because they don't have any authority over Israel. We are not a member state in the ICC.
The number of people being killed
will allow others. Yes, please.
Is Ayatollah Khamenei a target as well?
I know it is strange, but we never say time ahead who is an objective and who is not. Every civilian, innocent civilians, are not a target. But you saw this morning we wake up and we've heard that the commander of Iran in this war was took out after we took out the first one. So I will commend to the next online that will be offered the job not to respond positively very quickly.
Minister Zar?
Next question. Yes, please.
British Winston Marshall, British independent journalist. When Iran launched their missiles in April 2024, the British Royal Air Force were a part of the assistance to Israel in taking down those missiles in drones. The Times of London have reported that the British government were not informed about Operation Rising Lion. What changed in relations between Israel and Britain in that time, and what can we expect about future relations between the two countries?
I can only comment on behalf of the Israeli government and the Israeli people. You must ask this question the British government. Thank you.
Can I ask
Other questions, please?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Go ahead. Wait a second. Yes, please.
Patricia Gallardo from El Informador in Mexico. I wanted to ask you how many missiles have been launched since Friday, that was the start of the operation, and how many missiles have landed in Israel, and how many have been stopped by the Iron Dome?
We have, I cannot give you now the accurate number, but certainly hundreds of missiles. We knew when we decided on Thursday night this historic decision that we will face damages, that we will face casualties, but we also knew that there is a price not taking that decision. And that decision was taken in the last possible moment, a decision which is crucial to ensure the future and the security of the State of Israel. Next question. Yes, please.
Julian Porter of The Guardian, you said the third objective is to get rid of the plan, Iran's plan to
severely damage Iran's eliminations plan.
So how do you do that without changing the regime?
We are doing that gradually. First, we cut the hands of the octopus.
when we dealt with Hamas and Hezbollah. Now we are dealing with the head of the octopus. We are dealing with the most significant threats, and there are the ballistic threats and the nuclear threat, and those threats are combined with their allies to the Iranian axis. And while we are taking this operation, we are no doubt getting a progress in achieving this objective.
Next question. Yes. Other questions?
Minister, one IDS question.
You already asked.
Yeah. Yes, please.
What is your Fernanda Muñoz, reporter Indigo, Mexico City. What is your message to all the people in Israel and so foreigners that feel in risk every night for the
We are facing difficult days, but the people of Israel support this operation because the people of Israel totally understand it is vital to ensure the future of this state. So I'm saying to them, we will face these difficult days, we will face these casualties as well, but we will ensure the future of the state of Israel for a very, very long time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
That's Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar. He's at the site of a missile strike there in Rishon LeZion, which is a coastal city. It's just south of Tel Aviv, right near Ben Gurion Airport. Just talking about the clear goals and objectives of what Israel is trying to do in Iran to severely damage their ballistic missiles and nuclear program, and their plans to eliminate Israel, making it clear that the regime the plans to topple the regime are not an objective of the Israeli government. He says they might be a result, but he says they are not an objective, despite the fact that we've heard the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directly appeal to Iranians to overthrow the regime themselves. So
President Trump has called on Iran for unconditional surrender. In a flurry of posts on his social media this afternoon, Donald Trump called Iran's supreme leader an easy target, but said that the US was not going to kill him, at least not yet. US fighter jets are understood to be on their way to the Middle East as speculation grows that the US could become directly involved in the war between Israel and Iran. Tonight, Donald Trump has met his national security team to decide America's next move. Well, this is Tel Aviv tonight. Iran has fired more missiles into Israel, but there are no reports so far of any impacts. As millions flee Tehran today, we will ask if the US is about to get involved in the war and whether the regime in Iran could be about to fall. But first, here's Tom Bateman with the latest from Washington.
Donald Trump's nighttime dash back to Washington unleashed more uncertainty on a region at war and a frenzy of questions asked at 40,000 feet. First, what about French President Macron's remark about an Israel-Iran ceasefire plan?
Look at it better than ceasefire. We're not looking for a ceasefire. I didn't say I was looking for a ceasefire. That was Emmanuel, nice guy, but he doesn't get it right too often. But we're looking for better than a ceasefire.
The president then turned to an ultimatum for Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, saying he was an easy target. We're not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now, he posted. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. In another post, Mr. Trump said he expected unconditional surrender. The US is already helping Israel shoot down incoming missiles as Iran retaliates to Israel's attacks. But so far, Washington has said its role is limited to that. Mr. Trump has veered between threats to Tehran and highlighting that the US isn't involved. But today's sudden shift has led to mounting speculation over what's coming next. Over the past 3 days, at least 30 US military planes have been moved from bases in America to Europe. They are all KC-135 tanker aircraft used to refuel fighter jets and bombers. These pictures taken in Suffolk today appear to show an aerial refueling tanker accompanied by 4 fighter jets. One military expert told the BBC the flights were highly unusual and suggestive of contingency plans to support intensive combat operations in the Middle East. US officials are keeping their options open.
We believe that Iran, as President has said from the beginning, should not have a nuclear weapon. That position hasn't changed. They can give it up peacefully. That position hasn't changed. And as a result, right now, we've got assets in the region and we're going to defend them.
Israel wants these to join in its strikes. American B-2 stealth bombers, planes it doesn't have. These could be used to strike Iran's uranium enrichment site at Fordow. Hidden deep underground, it has long been a key target for the Israelis. But only the US is thought to have the bomb needed, the massive ordnance penetrator, to destroy it, a factor that has added to the pressure Israel's leader has put on the president. But Mr. Trump has also been pushing his desire for a deal with Iran. He still said he hasn't ruled out sending his envoy Steve Witkoff to meet the Iranians. How much of this manoeuvring is meant to force Tehran's hand as opposed to a planned US action is so far known only to Mr. Trump and his closest advisors. But as the world waits, America's military might is on the move. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Washington.
Let's speak to our North America editor, Sarah Smith, at the White House. So could the United States be about to get directly involved in this war?
Well, after a meeting with his top advisors in the Situation Room that lasted almost an hour and a half this afternoon and broke up recently, US officials are saying that Donald Trump is considering joining Israel in those attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. But it's pretty clear his top advisors are not agreed upon this. And there are, of course, lots of reasons for America not to get involved in this. They could easily get dragged into a wider conflict in the Middle East, which is absolutely the last thing Donald Trump wants to get involved in. Remember, he campaigned for election saying that he would put America first and not get involved in any foreign wars. That was a very popular message, and some of his most vocal supporters in Congress are also urging him not to do this. But there's one thing Donald Trump has always been absolutely consistent about and absolutely unequivocal on, and that is him saying Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. And he is said to believe that they are now very close to achieving that, so he could be talked into taking some kind of action possibly. He had wanted to do a deal with Iran to stop them from developing nuclear weapons, and there were negotiations and talks about that. Because remember, Donald Trump sees himself as a deal maker supreme, and he likes to look at himself as a peacemaker as well. But he set a 60-day deadline on those talks, and that deadline came and went last week without any kind of agreement. So now he is deeply concerned that Iran are not serious about doing a deal, that they have just been stringing him along. So although he might return to negotiations if they offered it, he will feel his hand is much strengthened if there is then a credible threat of military action coming from the United States as well as from Israel.
Sarah Smith, thank you. Well, Israel launched its first strikes on Iran 5 days ago on Friday in what it described as a preemptive offensive to neutralize Iran's nuclear program. Targets included nuclear facilities at Isfahan, Natanz and Arak. Oil depots and gas refineries across the country have also been targeted, and air defence systems, military bases and missile launch sites have been struck. Well, the BBC is not allowed to broadcast from inside Iran, but our colleagues in BBC Persian are keeping across the situation there. Siavash Arlan has this report.
Evacuating a city of 10 million is no easy task. Even before President Trump's evacuation warning, millions were fleeing the Iranian capital. Now the roads out of Tehran are choked with traffic. Scenes reminiscent of bank holidays, but this is a desperate goodbye. On the road, this driver comes across these men. Confused at first, he realized they are addicts who have fled a rehab center, damaged by the attacks. Back in Tehran, the subway, normally bustling with commuters, rarely looks like this. One Tehran resident who wishes to remain anonymous told us why he is staying.
Even though I hate the Islamic Republic, I'm staying in my home. I'm staying in my city. I'll try to stick to my routines. I'll try to find a cafe that's open and go there. If I see a couple people on the street, I'll smile at them, try to lift their spirits. I'll call my friends more often, support them, make them feel better. I think right now we have no one but each other, not Benjamin Netanyahu and not Israel. They certainly don't care about us, and neither does the Islamic Republic.
For those who chose to stay, using essential services can be challenging. Israeli strikes damaged water installations in affluent northern Tehran, while ATMs ran out of cash. And these are the studios of Iranian state TV. This is not just bombardments and missile attacks. Iran is fighting the enemy on its own soil. Israel has been infiltrating the country at all levels. Car bombs have been detonating, and the Iranian intelligence says it has discovered a number of enemy drone factories inside the country. And civilians are paying the price. This is Tehran's Red Crescent, desperately hoping to find survivors under the rubble. Among the lost are nurses, skaters, artists, lives cut short.
Buildings are being attacked that are residential.
Our colleague pressed Israel's UN ambassador on civilian casualties.
We will do everything we can to minimize civilian casualties, but as you said, it's a war, and we have seen what happened in our cities, so we will continue to target the military sites in Iran.
Few in Washington and Tel Aviv are talking publicly about what happens if the regime collapses. Iranians have been documenting how their lives are changing. President Trump said he wants to see their country prosper. Fewer will be willing to believe him today than they were just 5 days ago.
Siavash is with me now. Extraordinary scenes there from Iran, from Tehran just emptying out. Could the regime be about to fall?
That can be a very distinct possibility. I think at this point it really depends on the regime itself. Judging from what President Trump is saying, judging on the targeting of Israel, targeting many military centers rather than political institutions like the parliament or the government. Perhaps the US and Israel are not so much after regime change, but after, as President Trump said, total capitulation, total surrender, total humiliation of the Islamic regime. What they wish to have is a weakened Islamic regime without its nuclear program, unless it refuses to surrender. Unless the supreme leader refuses to surrender, judging again by what President Trump is saying, that's when the US may choose to strike the supreme leader and eliminate him. After that, obviously, the collapse of the regime will be a given.
Siavash Adlam, thank you. Well, more British military jets have been sent to Cyprus to bolster UK interests in the region. That's been confirmed today by the Defence Secretary John Healey. And at the G7 summit in Canada, world leaders have been left guessing what President Trump may do next. Our political editor Chris Mason has been at the summit and has been speaking to Sir Keir Starmer about the conflict, his concerns, and what should happen next.
If the people of Iran rose up against the regime there, would you welcome that?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into what the people of Iran should do. I've been really clear. I'm very concerned about the nuclear program that Iran is developing. That's a unanimous position in the G7.
But maybe the only way around that is a different regime.
Israel is obviously threatened, and I've been very clear about Israel's right to self-defense. This is a conflict which could very well escalate, which would have implications for the region, implications almost undoubtedly for Gaza and obviously for the economy.
How does it resolve itself? There is growing talk in the region about people rising up against the regime. People want to know what your instincts are about the long-term solution here to bring a peaceful solution.
Well, I'm no supporter of the regime in Iran.
So if the people there rose up against it, you'd welcome that?
It's not for me, as the UK Prime Minister, to start encouraging people in relation to what they might do at home. My absolute focus is on the need to de-escalate this.
How worried are you about the economic impact of the conflict back home on people's bills?
Well, I'm always concerned about the impact of international issues back on people back at home.
But yet another shock.
Well, you saw with Ukraine the direct impact it had on energy bills and on the cost of living. Equally, with this conflict with Israel and Iran, you can see the effect it's having on the economy, particularly the price of energy.
And you fear that sort of knock-on for people?
Well, of course I do.
Yeah.
I don't want to have that impact on the lives of people in the United Kingdom. It's among the reasons that I spend a good chunk of my time working at the international level to try to bring about a resolution to de-escalate the situation, because at a time of conflict globally, there is always going to be an impact domestically, and my job is to insulate and safeguard and mitigate that risk to everybody watching this, everybody across the United Kingdom.
So Keir Starmer talking to our political editor, Chris Mason. Well, let's speak now to our Middle East correspondent, Lucy Williamson, who is in Tel Aviv. And what is the situation there tonight? Tonight are the missile attacks from Iran continuing?
Well, the missile attacks have continued all through last night and all through today, the last one just a couple of hours ago. But Israel's army is making the point that these barrages appear to be getting smaller, and they say that's proof that their strategy of targeting Iran's launchers is working. Meanwhile, tonight there's been speculation on Israeli television about whether the United States will get involved in the military offensive, and Israel's national security chief has come out tonight saying the war in Iran won't finish until the underground site at Fordow is attacked. That's the site that Israel is thought to have won American help for. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has been very careful to say this is a US decision, but he's clearly very keen to have US support amid questions about where this war is going next and how it will end.
You back to Geneva, to the UN's Human Rights Council, where the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is speaking.
This is an unjust war imposed on my people since early hours of Friday, 13 June, when Israel perpetrated a mix of unlawful and criminal operations against off-duty military personnel, university professors, and ordinary people. Hundreds of my fellow Iranians have been killed and injured following Israel's surprise armed attacks and terrorist operations on residential areas, public infrastructures, hospitals, health centers, and of course, the Foreign Ministry. Our peaceful nuclear facilities have also been targeted, despite their being under full monitoring of IAEA, and despite the fact that attacking such facilities are absolutely banned under international law. Israel attacks on nuclear facilities are grave war crimes, given also the danger of environmental and health catastrophe as the result of radiological leakage. Mr. President, Iran, a founding member of the United Nations system, rightfully expects each and every one of you to stand for justice, rule of law, and basic tenets of humanity and ethics. Iran is under a merciless act of aggression. This is crystal clear fact, must not be allowed to be twisted upside down by Israel and its backers. Israel's aggression on Iran cannot and must not be justified by any legal or moral standards. Any justification for this unjust and criminal war would be tantamount to complicity. Iran is defending itself against the barbaric aggression. We are entitled, tasked, and determined to defend our territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and security with all force. This is our inherent right, as also clearly recognized under Article 51 of Charter. Dear colleagues, the peace and rule of law are at serious stake as the result of Israel's unlawful invasion of Iran. Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. International humanitarian law, already badly undermined as a consequence of Israel's relentless atrocities in occupied Palestine and elsewhere, is now under another extremely serious danger as Israel is committing grave violations of 1949 Geneva Conventions. Mr. President, Switzerland is the custodian of Geneva Conventions and protocols on IHL, and has an important responsibility in this regard. Indeed, every state party to 1949 Convention shall shoulder their responsibility under these conventions, in particular, Common Articles 1 and 3 of these conventions. Dear colleagues, we were attacked in the midst of an ongoing diplomatic process. We were supposed to meet with Americans on 15 June to craft a very promising agreement for peaceful resolution of the issues fabricated over our peaceful nuclear program. It was a betrayal of diplomacy and an unprecedented blow to the foundation of international law and UN system. Let me be clear. If there is any use of costly systems and mechanisms we have created for the past 80 decades to preserve human rights and dignity, now is the time to do it. We need action now. Otherwise, the whole UN-based international law system would corrode badly. This is a historic moment for human civilization when a civilized nation has come under an unjust war of aggression. The world, every state, every UN mechanism and body has to be alarmed and has to act now to stop the aggressor, to end impunity and to hold the criminals accountable for their unending atrocities and crimes in our region. This is a call from someone who has allocated his whole life to dialogue and diplomacy, but who also is a veteran of an imposed war by Saddam regime and knows how to defend his beloved motherland. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies,
and that was the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi addressing the Human Rights Council in Geneva. He said that Iran had been attacked in the middle of an ongoing diplomatic process and called it an unjust war. Earlier we heard from the ambassador for the permanent mission of Israel to the UN office in Geneva, saying that Iran was destabilizing the world and was an imminent and existential threat to Israel. So those comments ahead of the talks involving the foreign ministers of the UK, Germany, France, and the Iranian foreign minister who you saw there, taking place in Geneva shortly.
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The U.S. hit 3 nuclear sites in Iran overnight, but it remains unclear where the strikes did destroy all of Iran's nuclear capabilities. This report now from our North America editor, Sarah Smith.
Donald Trump, who promised to end foreign wars, went on live television to announce the attacks that may have just made him yet another wartime president.
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
In the White House Situation Room with his top security officials, President Trump, making the final decision to attack, had to calculate what the consequences might be. Will airstrikes against Iran's nuclear sites result in attacks on US forces that could start a full-scale war? In these pictures from Isfahan, you can see and hear the airstrikes hitting one of the 3 nuclear sites attacked. Iran obviously knew this was a possibility, but may not have been expecting it so soon. President Trump had said he would take up to 2 weeks to decide whether to take military action. At the Pentagon, they want to say this operation is already over. Iran should not respond.
The operation President Trump planned was bold, and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen.
This Pentagon map shows warplanes taking off from Missouri in the American heartland and flying a 40-hour round trip to deliver their enormous munitions, 14 bunker buster bombs. What damage did they do? These satellite photographs show the underground nuclear site at Fordow before and then after the airstrikes. The B-2 bombers totally obliterated the site, claimed Donald Trump. The US military haven't actually made a final assessment, but say the facility has been severely damaged, not destroyed. Iran has said it will respond in self-defense. It hasn't said how.
It is an outrageous, grave and unprecedented violation of the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression.
World leaders have hastily convened crisis meetings in international capitals, aware that a growing conflict would affect them all. The UN Security Council is in emergency session, deeply concerned about military escalation in the Middle East.
The people of the region cannot endure another cycle of destruction. And yet, we now risk descending into a rat hole of retaliation after retaliation.
The US Congress was not consulted before the strikes. The president can take limited military actions without it. Only Congress can authorize going to war. Democrats claim Mr. Trump has acted unconstitutionally.
This is the U.S. jumping into a war of choice at Donald Trump's urging, without any compelling national security interest for the United States to act in this way, particularly without a debate and vote in Congress.
As these B-2 bombers are seen returning to their American base, their commanders don't know if they have undertaken a specific, limited mission or started a war. How will Iran retaliate for these airstrikes, and what will the US do then? This is a delicate and dangerous moment in the Middle East and around the world.
This is BBC News, our latest headlines. Iran has launched missiles at a key US airbase in Qatar. Retaliation, it says, for the recent American bombing of its nuclear sites, ordered by President Trump. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have released these images and issued a statement saying Iran will not leave any attack on its territorial integrity, sovereignty and national security unanswered under any circumstances. Qatar confirmed the attack on the US base Al Udeid. Well, Qatar called it a flagrant violation and said it reserves the right to respond directly. There are reports Iran may have telegraphed the attack in advance to Qatar and even to the United States, with indications this was a largely symbolic, choreographed missile strike. Iran says 6 missiles were used. Well, Al Udeid is the largest US military base in the Middle East, the forward operating base of US Central Command in the Middle East and home to nearly 8,000 American troops. President Trump visited it only a few weeks ago. The Pentagon says the base was attacked by short and medium-range ballistic missiles launched from Iran, but there are no reports, it says, of US casualties. Well, meanwhile, in Washington, Donald Trump is due to attend a National Security Council meeting shortly after the bombing of Iran that he ordered. And he had said that any retaliation by Iran would be, quote, met by force far greater. So now the question is, how will he respond to these Iranian attacks that we've just been telling you about? Well, let's get the very latest now. Joining us is John Donnison, who's in Washington, Ione Wells, who's in Jerusalem, and Nafiseh Konavad, who's in Baghdad. John, let's go to you first of all. All eyes really on Donald Trump now to see how he responds to this response from Iran.
Yes, and as you say, everyone wants to know the answer to that, and I don't think I can give that. We're going to have to wait and see. But certainly, since these attacks were launched, it does seem that they were somewhat telegraphed. There was some sort of warning, and we've actually just had the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives here saying that this sort of response from Iran was anticipated, and given that there are no casualties reported on the ground, no US servicemen injured or killed, we don't even know whether any of these missiles from Iran met their target. I do think that certainly the Iranians are giving a signal that, you know, this might be some sort of off-ramp. Everyone, as the previous guest here on BBC World was saying, is playing to their domestic audience. That's what Donald Trump has got to do. That's what the Qataris are doing, the Israelis and the Iranians. So the Iranians, they needed to send a signal that what America did on Saturday evening, the early hours of Sunday morning, couldn't be met without some sort of response. But it does seem that this was relatively moderate in terms of the damage it's done.
John, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Ione Wells, who's covering events in Israel for us. Ione, what is the reaction in Israel to what we've been hearing about these Iranian attacks on this US base in Qatar?
Continued carrying out further strikes on Iran. They see this sort of wider target and as something they need to continue doing. They've said just this evening as well that they have been striking further military targets, including the headquarters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but also other targets that they say are associated with the regime, including a prison, which it's understood was where various political prisoners were detained in Iran, people who had, for example, opposed the Iranian leadership. Israel has essentially said that its military is continuing to strike these different targets in Iran this evening, will continue to do so. There is no sign that events that have taken place this evening have changed that. And certainly the big question now really, though, has been, will Iran carry out further retaliation, both towards Israel here, but also to potential other US bases in the region? And of course, as John was referencing there, how does the US respond? Do they take this message of the fact that no US personnel were injured or hurt in this? Do they take that as an indication to not necessarily respond at this point? Or is there going to be further escalation? This is something people in the region are waiting for.
Ione, thank you very much indeed. And let's go to Nafisa Konavad, who's in Baghdad, in Iraq. What has been the response to all this there?
Well, here in Iraq, first everyone thought that there were news about activation of air defense system in Al-Assad Air Base, housing U.S. forces in part of Iraq in Al-Anbar province. But it is now clear that there was no other attack on any other bases, U.S. bases in the region, including Iraq, that everyone was very worried here that there might be attack on US bases here in this country, which had previously experienced that. And the evacuation of the US embassy, you may see a part of it behind me on the other side of Tigris River, it was evacuated, and that really caused a kind of interpretation that this might be a target, Iraq might be a target. But now it is clear that the air defense system in Al-Assad Air Base and also in other countries like Kuwait have been activated to intercept these missiles that were firing towards Qatar, but there was no other attack to different countries. But all Persian Gulf countries, one after another, like Emirates, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and even somehow Oman, that was supposed to host Iran-US talk, they condemned the escalation. For the earlier four, they clearly condemned the attack, but Oman used a bit more moderate language, saying that the escalation happened triggered by Israeli attack first and asking for de-escalation. So the question is, was it all the response that Iran was going to give? For now, I know that the whole region is in high alert. All the flights are being cancelled to the various airports in the region, including UAE and even Jordan, and in some part in Lebanon. And here in Baghdad, the airspace is still closed. So there are expectations that there might be other attacks, but also if there might be, there are other understanding that there was a very delicate calculation in this response, and it is one-off response to kind of at least de-escalate for the moment with the US, not probably with Israel.
Okay, Nafisa, thank you very much in Baghdad, and also thanks to Ione Wells in Jerusalem, and John Donaldson, who's in Washington, with the very latest from there. And we'll be, of course, crossing back to Washington as soon as we get any more news on how President Trump plans to respond to this. And we can speak now to somebody who was on the ground when the missiles, those Iranian missiles, were intercepted in Qatar.
Oh my God.
Oh my word.
Well, Helen Markey is a school teacher who was on her way home when she took that video of the skies above, and Helen's safely now at home. We can speak to her. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just tell us a bit more about what you saw, what you heard, and what you felt.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was really unexpected. It all happened incredibly quickly. We were aware of rising political tensions in the region between the US and Iran, and that we had heard that the US had advised its citizens to take shelter in place. But we really had no idea what was about to happen. And about 2 hours later, I left my apartment and I was just getting into my car. And all of a sudden, I saw the sky was illuminated with what seemed like hundreds of missiles. And I can only describe it as it was mesmerizing and terrifying all in one. And what we saw were these really bright lights that were suspended in the sky. And then all of a sudden they would shoot towards something and there'd be an explosion. And it was a loud explosion. We were hearing this and we were feeling the rumbles in our apartment block. Yeah, pretty terrifying situation for us.
And a lot of those probably, one assumes, were interceptor missiles trying to bring down the Iranian missiles. But was this an attack in some ways you were expecting? There is a huge American base there. The Iranians had promised retaliation for the US bombing over the weekend.
Yeah, we weren't expecting it at all. We were checking our emails. We'd heard that schools were closing in Doha. We were checking our emails to see if we were closing ourselves, but we had no idea that there was about to be an attack on the American military base in Doha. As I said, it did happen incredibly quickly. This is the last week of school for us in Doha. So what we were concerned about was whether we were able to get home in the next couple of days. And we had no idea that this was going to happen.
And have you had any word from the authorities about what you should be doing now or what you should have been doing earlier?
We've had communications from the school, and the government has been good at keeping us, keeping everybody calm. As far as I'm aware, there's been no casualties. There have been videos arising of debris that have fallen in the city, but as far as I'm aware, nobody's been injured. We're all safe here. We're back in our apartments. So it was just a very unexpected and surreal situation to be in.
And unexpected and surreal. Was it scary? Were you frightened?
Yeah, it was very scary. Yeah. Yeah, people were sort of like in the streets. I mean, we were at the sort of the ground level of our apartment block, watching it happen. We weren't sure where to go. We weren't sure what to do. We'd never been in this situation before. But it was when the building started shaking that people started coming down, and we congregated down there on the street. And obviously people were filming, and people were visibly very sort of nervous and concerned as to what was happening. But it ended in about, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I don't know.
And were you pretty sure?
It was over incredibly quickly.
And were you pretty sure as soon as it happened what it was, that this was some sort of Iranian response?
I mean, when I left the apartment building and I saw all those lights, it was obvious that they were going in the direction of Iran. My initial thought was it was bombs, and I was terrified. And then, yeah, all of these lights were going in the direction of Iran. We checked on Google Maps, and then it was just a very odd thing to see. These bright lights were sort of falling down towards Doha, falling downwards, and we thought, is there going to be an explosion? Are these bombs? And then we realized that actually they were intercepting the Iranian missiles. And when we knew that, we actually felt a deep sort of sense of relief, and we felt a lot safer because they were very accurate. They seemed to be doing a very good job at deterring these missiles.
And just lastly, what about the future now? Are you worried there'll be more of this, or do you think that's it for the time being?
No, I can't say. I mean, we weren't really expecting this, so I don't know what the night has in store for us. We've closed the schools probably for the rest of the week, but I'm not sure. We've closed the schools for tomorrow, and we're all taking shelter in our apartment. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to Europe in the summer, but I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, I am concerned for our students, concerned for all these families that we've got here. Some are stuck abroad and some are in danger, and it's terrifying, to be honest.
All right, well, we'll take care. Stay safe. Thank you so much for being with us and telling us about your experiences. That's Helen Markey, who's a school teacher who was, as we were saying, on her way home when she took that video of The skies above showing the Iranian missile attack and the interceptor missiles from Qatar designed to bring them down.
President Trump has called for peace tonight following an attack by Iran on a US military airbase in Qatar in revenge for US strikes on its nuclear facilities at the weekend. This evening, Mr. Trump, writing on social media, said that Iran had got it out of its system and that hopefully there'd be no further hate. He also thanked Iran for giving the US prior warning of the strikes. More on the attack in a moment, but first let's go straight to Washington and to Sarah Smith. So, is this Mr. Trump calling for de-escalation, Sarah?
Well, absolutely. We have not heard definitively from the US administration that they don't intend to launch a retaliatory tit-for-tat attack. But President Trump does not sound like somebody who is ready to do that when he posts on social media in all capital letters, "Congratulations, world, it's time for peace." Now, they knew here inside the White House that there was inevitably going to be a retaliatory attack from Iran. What they didn't know was how aggressive or how destructive it was going to be. And in fact, what we saw was an Iranian action that was pretty much deliberately designed to do as little damage as possible. I mean, what's happened today must be one of the most careful and frankly polite military exchanges in recent history. You had Iran warning the United States in advance of what they were going to do, and then in a post on social media, Donald Trump has even been thanking them. He said, "I would like to thank Iran for giving us early notice, which made it possible for no lives to be lost and nobody to be injured. Perhaps Iran can now proceed to peace and harmony in the region. I will enthusiastically encourage Israel to do the same." And Donald Trump then went on to say that Iran had now got everything out of their system. So that sounds very much like he is ready to declare this over, and it's difficult to imagine why Iran would be planning further action after the great care and delicacy they have taken over the attack today. It was not guaranteed this was going to go this way when Donald Trump launched those airstrikes on Saturday night against Iran's nuclear facilities. He could not be sure that this is how Iran was going to respond. This is a best case scenario in many ways for the United States and for President Trump, and there will be great relief inside the White House that this is how it's gone down.
Sarah Smith, thank you very much. Well, tonight the US has lifted the advice to its citizens in Qatar to stay indoors. Qatar says all the Iranian missiles which were aimed at the US military base were intercepted and that there were no casualties. A statement by Iran said that 6 missiles were launched, the same number used in the American attack on its nuclear site in Fordow. This report is by our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
A normal night out in Qatar. But there was nothing normal about this. 6 Iranian ballistic missiles arching through the sky, aimed at America's airbase. Retaliation for the recent US raid on Iran. There were no casualties, and all the missiles were intercepted by air defences. For expats like this British teacher in Doha, it was still a shock.
And I can only describe it as it was mesmerizing and terrifying all in one. And what we saw were these really bright lights that were suspended in the sky. And then all of a sudden they would shoot towards something and there'd be an explosion.
Iran released these pictures of what it says was the missiles being launched, calling it Operation Heralds of Conquest. Crucially, it gave Qatar advance notice, time for its residents to take cover. This was a dramatic yet carefully calibrated attack. The US has around 17 air bases dotted all over the Middle East, as well as naval facilities and land bases in Iraq. Qatar hosts the most important airbase of all at Al Udeid, on the edge of the Qatari capital Doha, but it's close to Iran. As these satellite images show, in early June, it was hosting aircraft. 2 weeks later, they'd been evacuated. Al Udeid is normally buzzing with warplanes. It's the forward headquarters for US Central Command in the Middle East, home to 10,000 troops, and from where all US and Allied air operations are directed in the region.
سپاه پاسداران انقلاب اسلامی
A defiant statement from Iran tonight, calling its actions firm and decisive response to US aggression. But there are signs it may not be looking to take this further. There is still the latent threat to the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's parliament voted to block it, which would choke off up to 20% of the world's oil supplies. But that would harm Iran too, and China. So for now, it's just possible that tensions may be about to ease. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
President Trump has been speaking in the last few minutes, just as he left the White House on the way to Joint Base Andrews. Just a very short ride by helicopter from the White House, a matter of 5 or 6 minutes or so. But before he boarded the helicopter, he did make his first remarks since posting about the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, saying he was unhappy with Iran. He was also unhappy with Israel, but he was more unhappy, he said, with Israel than Iran. Let's have a listen to those remarks.
They didn't have to unload, and I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong, but in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot, and now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you, and I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either. All I do is play both sides. I'm going now, as you know, to NATO. Some of you are going with me, and I think it's going to be successful. We'll see. I'll let you know.
Are you going to see the agreement? It's a new dawn in the Middle East. Thanks to the agreement you managed to achieve. What are your future plans for the region, for Saudi Arabia, Israel, Gaza, the hostages?
Look, you're asking me about women in the Middle East. It's getting a lot better. Things are happening at a high level. As you know, Saudi Arabia's done a really good job. It's coming out far faster than I thought. So we're very happy about what's happening with women in the Middle East.
No, I'm talking about a new dawn in the Middle East that you managed to achieve last night.
Yeah.
The region is going to a new place with this agreement. Can you tell us what's your future plans for Gaza, for the hostages?
Yeah. It's a new dawn. I appreciate the question. You're very nice. Who are you?
Thank you. I'm Neria Kraus from Israeli Channel 13 News.
Well, we have to have Israel calm down because they went on a mission this morning. I got to get Israel to calm down now.
Did you get to speak with the Prime Minister? Did you talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu last night?
I speak to everybody.
You urge both sides not to violate the ceasefire, but reports coming from the region suggest that the sides accuse each other for violating the ceasefire. So
I think they both violated it. I don't think I'm not sure they did it intentionally. They couldn't rein people back. I don't like the fact that Israel went out this morning at all, and I'm going to see if I can stop it. So as soon as I get away from you, I'm going to see if I can stop it, okay?
Have you spoken to him this morning? How confident are you that Iran is completely demolished?
I think it's been completely demolished. I think the reason we're here is because those pilots, those B-2 pilots, did an unbelievable job. And you know, the fake news, like CNN in particular, they're trying to say, well, I agree that it was destroyed, but maybe not that destroyed. You know what they're doing? They're really hurting great pilots that put their lives in the line. CNN is scum, and so is MSDNC. They're all, and frankly, the networks aren't much better. It's all fake news, but they should not have done that. Those pilots hit their targets. Those targets were obliterated, and the pilots should be given credit. They're not after the pilots, they're after me. They want to try and demean.
You don't believe that Iran can rebuild its nuclear program?
Iran will never rebuild its nuclear. From there? Absolutely not. That place is under rock. That place is demolished. The B-2 pilots did their job. They did it better than anybody could even imagine. They hit late in the evening. It was dark with no moon, and they hit that target with every one of those things, and that place is gone. But when I see CNN all night long, they're trying to say, well, maybe it wasn't really as demolished as we thought. It was demolished. You take a look at the pinpricks, and you see that place is gone. And I will say, I think CNN ought to apologize to the pilots of the B-2s. I think that MSDNC ought to apologize. I think these guys really, these networks and these cable networks are real losers. You really are. You're real losers.
Israel says that they violated the ceasefire.
You're gutless losers. I say that to CNN because I watch it. I have no choice. I got to watch that garbage. It's all garbage. It's all fake news. But I think CNN is a gutless group of people, and the people that run it, nobody even knows it's been sold so many times, but the people that run it ought to be ashamed. MSDNC, a guy named Brian Roberts, he heads it. He's a disgrace. He's a weak, pathetic disgrace.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement, the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that.
Well, let's talk about the aftermath of the weekend's US strikes on Iran's nuclear program. In Iran itself, the judiciary's news agency says 3 men accused of spying for Israel have been hanged. Reports also say Iran has arrested 700 people accused of having ties with Israel during the 12-day conflict. With me is Param Gabadi from BBC Persian. Param, I mean, this is not something we're unused to with the Iranian regime putting people to death. What do we know about this instance?
So it shows that how Iran is in a state of panic, Iranian authorities. I mean, how can you arrest 700 spies in a matter of days? So it shows that Iranians are, they want to show strength. And that's what many Iranians have feared in the past few days, that the Iranian authorities, because they feel humiliated, they will take revenge on their own people. But the point is that I was watching the Iranian state TV and they were lining up 6 men. And one of them was saying, I was just a motorcycle delivery guy. And he said that, yeah, what did you do? Yeah, I was working for Mossad, delivering things here and there. So, I mean, the infiltration, the collaboration should be at extremely high level, not just probably someone with a motorcycle, because they knew in the past few days Israelis targeted so many nuclear scientists, high-ranking commanders. Some of them, one nuclear scientist survived one attack, was in a hiding in one of the relatives' house in a totally different city, and he was targeted there. And that shows the level of intelligence that the Israelis had, that they even managed to kill so many commanders on day 1 of the attack. It's not just 700 people that you can easily find throughout Iran. So but Iranians, like Israelis, Iranian authorities like Israelis, they're celebrating, they're claiming victory, they're in a celebratory mood. And but that's when you talk to the people on the ground, the mood is far from that. Especially nowadays, people have realized that Donald Trump is unpredictable. So they are saying that this war unexpectedly started. It came to an end quite unexpectedly, but we are not sure if it's going to start again tomorrow morning.
So they're still feeling very insecure. This ceasefire for them isn't a time that they feel they can relax. How much do they feel their leadership has been weakened by what has happened, and what do they think the consequences of that might be?
So they feel it's volatile because, the ceasefire is holding. Yes, Iran is not sending missiles and Israel is not sending fighter jets. However, throughout Iran, in Zanjan, in capital Tehran, in the northern part of Iran, the air defense system was activated. And again, that's another reason that many Iranians feel that this truce, this ceasefire is volatile, because they see the sounds of air defense system in the system, but they've lost their trust in the leadership. They say that Khamenei, the supreme leader, was in the hiding since day 1. He just published some pre-recorded videos, but he did not appear among his supporters, even the closest to him. And the Iranian sky was defenseless. Fighter jets, Israeli fighter jets, they maneuvered and they targeted all across Iran from north to south and east to west.
Param, thank you very much. Param Gabadi from BBC Persian.